Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for joining us today on our show where we're going to discuss and review the debate Jake had with the infamous Aron Ra. Alhamdulillah, we are joined by Jake and by Yusuf, but also our very special guest. Alhamdulillah, Faraz Zahabi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Jazakallah khair for coming on. He doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm just going to give a very brief introduction about Brother Faraz. He is somebody who's done a degree in philosophy at Concordia University in Canada. He's specialized in ancient Greek history and philosophy. He's also appeared on various podcasts, including Joe Rogan's podcast on a number of occasions, and has done what's now considered very famous discussion about the woo of science, the limitations of science, which has garnered over 2 million views just on that clip alone. He's also, as many of you probably already know, head of the TriStar Gym, trained many world champions and various prominent individuals in the MMA world, including George St. Pierre. So Jazakallah khair for us for coming on. Obviously, we want your expertise now in philosophy and rational and intellectual arguments. And obviously, we've also got Brother Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, who is engaged in the debate, who's been a very busy week for him, busy couple of weeks. So Jazakallah khair for doing this review with us, obviously. One of the co-founders of TAP, and Yusuf's in the background somewhere, so he'll be joining as well. So let's get into the first discussion. Yeah. So Jake, we might play some timestamps, but we've not really got timestamps prepared. But what we have got prepared is the discussions that have taken place on both sides. Yeah. Part of the reason why some of the timestamps are not really that good on this issue is because it's just Aron Ra just ranting a lot of the times against Jake. Yeah. So anyway, first question I want to ask Jake is why did you go down this transcendental argument for God, or why did you go for that argument as opposed to maybe a traditional contingency or cosmological argument?
Yeah, so I mean the audience should be familiar with like contingency or kalam style arguments. We've gone through them a lot on this channel. But what I wanted to do with this debate is introduce the audience maybe to a different argument that they hadn't heard before, or maybe if they weren't that familiar with it. So it was a way of introducing a somewhat new argument to them. And I think that it's a very strong argument. I think it's very robust. And I think it undercuts a lot of the argumentation from the other side, from people like Aron Ra and Matt Dillahunty and their likes, who have a very sort of empiricist approach. Not to say that we have a problem with arguments that rely on empirical premises, but to show that there's something that is more fundamental, things like truth and other transcendental categories that are more fundamental to things like science itself. So that's what I was trying to do with the argument.
Okay. For us, if I could ask you, could you sort of outline to us what the difference is? Obviously, we don't want to go into the details of the specific argument, but what's the difference between what they term a transcendental argument or tag argument compared to like a cosmological argument?
Well, you start off with I would actually love for Jake to sum up his version of the transcendental argument, because the thing is there are many ways to go about it, and also the audio, when I listened to it, it wasn't really good, your audio during the debate. So I didn't get a chance to hear your particulars. I would have loved to actually hear your particulars, if you don't mind summoning them up.
Yeah, maybe I can just very quickly go through the premises of my argument, or maybe I can.
Are you able to bring it up, Jake?
I don't know if I'm able to do that. Let me see.
If you've got it on a document, you could just share your screen.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't prepared for that though. So let me see if I can
Take your time.
find it here quickly.
See, one of the sort of views that I had is that when Aron Ra came onto our discussion that we had with him, he already acknowledged and accepted the necessary being. So obviously, a necessary being doesn't necessitate a person, an agent, a willful agent, but it does acknowledge the fact that something has to be necessary. So the issue here then is the fact that we have a necessary being, but the question is, what are the qualities or what are the properties? Is it a mind-like necessary being? So I think that's part of the reasons to go down a transcendental argument is that, well, you've established the first premise or the first stage of the argument. The next stage is say, okay, something's eternal. What are those properties of that eternality? Have you got it up, Jake?
I've got my notes here. I can share my screen.
The thing is, transcendental arguments are very profound. They're very profound. They take trained thinkers. They take somebody with a history of thinking. I don't think Aron Ra is remotely trained in this field. So when you spring that on him, I don't think he'll understand it. To be honest with you, it takes a lot of philosophical background to understand that these aren't just words. Because they're gonna be like, "Oh, this is just words to me." That's what he hears. He doesn't. I don't think he comprehends the necessity and or meaning. I don't think he has a background in epistemology. From after hearing him talk, I had the sense that he didn't understand anything of what you said whatsoever.
He's not even trying to listen. He's
because he's an empiricist, right? He wants to see something. He wants something to be put in a test tube, so to speak. He wants an empirical sensory data experience.
It's a product with thermometers. Measure with a measuring tape.
So this is the outline of the argument. I'll just read it and then I'll just sort of summarize it even further. But it says, premise one, necessarily either the law of non-contradiction is true or the law of non-contradiction is not true. That seems pretty simple and straightforward. I said premise two, premise one is necessarily true, i.e. it is true and could not have failed to be true. That just means that it's a necessary truth, right? It's not something that was true at one time but not true at another time, or can fail to be true at some other time. It's always true and must be true. Premise three says true propositions exist. And as I said in the debate, this is maybe somewhat of a controversial premise. Premise four, therefore, at least one true proposition exists necessarily. And that would be something like what premise one states. And then premise five, I say that propositions are mental entities, i.e. thoughts. And that's also somewhat controversial, but I gave an argument or a couple arguments for that in the debate. Premise six, therefore, necessary propositions are necessarily existent thoughts. Premise seven, thoughts cannot exist apart from an intellect. That's pretty straightforward. You can't have sort of free-flowing thoughts apart from a mind or some type of intellect. And then the conclusion is, therefore, a necessary intellect exists. So it could look very complicated on the screen, but in the actual debate, I tried to break down each one of the premises and explain it simply. But what I'll do here is give a somewhat more summarized version of the argument and what I'm trying to get at. Basically, I'm arguing from the concept of truth to God, that if you think that something like truth exists, which most people think that truth exists, then I'm arguing that at least one, and I would argue more, but at least one necessary truth must exist. Something like the law of non-contradiction, or 2 + 2 = 4, or 1 + 1 = 2. These kind of things. They're typically understood as necessary truths. Now, if you believe that necessary truths exist, I argue that they're best understood as mental entities, because they have certain qualities about them that require, or that typically go in line with things like thoughts or aspects of a mind. And one of them is what's called intentionality, which is the aboutness of something. So, for example, I can think about this live stream. I can think about drinking coffee in the morning. So my thoughts can be about certain things, and truth is that which corresponds to reality. That's typically how it's defined. And so if you believe that truth is something which corresponds to something else, that means it's intrinsically about something else, meaning the outside world. And what I argue is it's best understood as something like a thought or a mental concept within the mind. And if you have a necessary truth, you're going to need a necessary intellect or a necessary being to ground these necessary true propositions, because all humans are contingent, right? So there's a time at which humans didn't exist. Atheists believe there's a time in which humans will no longer exist. And certainly God, if he wanted to, he could easily just wipe out all of humanity. So there's nothing necessary about human beings. And therefore, the thoughts of human beings can't play the role of these necessary propositions. You're going to need something which is necessary in and of itself that can't fail to exist to ground these true propositions like 2 + 2 = 4 or the law of non-contradiction, etc. So that's the basic thrust of the argument. But of course, there's a lot of questions and things to talk about with it. So I don't know if you guys have any comments or questions.
Yeah, I'd like to go through the list if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Number one is it's an axiomatic statement. We all agree to this. The law of non-contradiction is true. Nobody disagrees to this. Not the atheist, not the Muslim. And if they say they don't agree, they're liars. Because if the law of non-contradiction is false, that means everything is true. That means squared circles exist. That means married bachelors exist. If you deny the law of non-contradiction, it's intellectual suicide. Aron Ra, when I heard him say, I don't even believe in the law of non-contradiction, that's intellectual suicide. That means your entire scientific endeavor is finished. You just made takfir of all science. Science is founded on the belief that there are no contradictions in the world. We presuppose in science that the world is uniform and knowable, that there is truth. We cannot do science without this intuitive belief. It's called, in epistemology, we call it an axiom. It's self-evident. To argue against it is to say truth doesn't exist. Why would I do science? Why would you do a scientific experiment if your results could be just contradicted by any statement? We assume many things. Before we do science, we have many assumptions. Einstein said it beautifully. He said, look, intuition is a gift and its servant is reason. First, we have these intuitive beliefs that truth exists, that the law of non-contradiction is true. If I tell you that I'm married and then I tell you I'm a bachelor, you're gonna be like, wait a second, you're either married or you're a bachelor. You can't be both. It's, from Socrates all the way to Hume, we all agree. Socrates, there's a famous book, the Book of Menos. He questions a slave boy with zero education. And as he's questioning the slave boy recognizes contradictions and he has certain beliefs. And Socrates says, hey, these beliefs are innate. Everybody agrees, even atheists like David Hume, real atheists, not Aron Ra atheists, no offense, but he doesn't know anything about epistemology. Hardcore atheists like David Hume will tell you the law of non-contradiction cannot be ignored. Can I see the list again, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
Just as a quick point as well, so really quickly on before we move on to the next one, because Jake, you're not even saying that law of non-contradiction is a necessary truth in that first premise. You're just simply saying it's true to say it's either true or false.
No, I understand. I understand.
Is that right?
I'm giving a summary here. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. No, I know.
I'm giving.
But it's just a clever way because you. Yeah. Go on.
No, what Faraz is saying is also correct, right? But see, what I tried to do here, even with premise one, is even make a more modest claim, right? Which my claim is it's either true or it's not.
Right.
And if you reject that, then yeah, you're
We
in
can't go
la
on the
la
list.
land.
We
I
cannot
mean,
go on the list. And you know what? We can't
Yeah.
do science.
Yeah,
Atheists,
exactly.
Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, we all accept premise one. Nobody's gonna say, we all accept, I should say, the law of
Mhm.
non-contradiction. It's impossible to do science. If you
Mhm.
deny the law of non-contradiction, you cannot do science. I mean, I wish we
Yeah.
had the square of oppositions up, but leave that for another day.
There's
Number 3, true propositions exist. That's also necessarily true. If I disagreed, I would be claiming that my proposition is true and yours is false. Again, it's axiomatic. We can't get away from it. We cannot use logic to argue against logic, which is what Aron Ra does later in the discussion with you. He's trying to use reason to say reason is not true. It's a self-defeating position. If I don't accept premise 3, I'm in a self-defeating position. I'm claiming that I hold a true proposition, that your proposition, the propositions are not true, but I'm making a claim of truth. It's a self-defeating, contradictory position. It's nonsense. Okay, we cannot do science, we cannot do theology, we cannot do philosophy, we cannot do logic unless we accept that true propositions exist.
Premise 1 has a similar thing to it as well, where if you deny it, you're saying it's true at the same time. Because if you say the law of non-contradiction isn't true, you're saying essentially that it is true and it isn't true.
Well, if you're
and
saying,
it's the same with premise 3. It's like you require that very thing that you're going to try to negate in order to negate it.
I mean, if you deny the law of non-contradiction, in my opinion, there's no reason talking to you. You believe in squared circles. I mean, what could I do?
Yeah.
You believe in squared circles. You believe that you're a bachelor and you're married, and like Nietzsche had a more nuanced view. Nietzsche was saying, look, we can't get to the truth, so make your truth what you want it to be. Okay, that's a different proposition, but he didn't deny that the world is uniform. Logic exists. We all use logic. Everybody uses logic. Nobody's sitting there. If you're a radical skeptic, we tell radical skeptics, don't talk. You just can't say anything. If you're a radical skeptic and you think even the law of non-contradiction is false, that's a claim in itself. Like you said, it's a claim in itself. You're making an appeal to truth. It's impossible to deny. Okay, so I mean, it's intellectual suicide. You know, Aron Ra, he committed intellectual suicide, but I don't think he knows what he was saying. I don't think he has any training in epistemology whatsoever. Propositions are mental.
Sorry, for us, just before we move on to the other premises of the argument, because I want to focus on this number 3.
Yes, sure.
Premise number 3: true propositions exist. So, Jake, this sounds to me like you're a realist in terms of propositions. That there is something called a proposition that exists outside the human mind. I'm not saying outside of minds, but outside the human minds. There's something called a proposition. Yeah, or true propositions. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, so this was part of the debate, and that's where we got hung up on, where Aron wasn't denying truth, right? He was saying that truth is a property of sentences. But I was arguing that there's something that is true, which is called the proposition, which is more fundamental than a sentence. Why? Because we can imagine that no sentence exists, right? All sentences are contingent, right? So
true, but he's even more wrong than that. If you don't mind me chiming in, he's even more wrong than that. When you learn words, you have an infinite regress. Imagine I had to explain to you the word dog, and then I had to use more words to explain to you what the word dog means. So then I'd have an infinite regress of words. I'd have an infinite regress of words. If I want to explain to you the word dog and I start saying four-legged, then I have to explain the word four. Now I have to explain the word legged. Now I use more words. Well, four is like one, but 4 times, and I have to explain the word one, and so on and so on. I'd have an infinite regress of words. I have to show you a dog, then I make the sound dog, and you associate it with that object that I'm showing you. Words are related to experiences. You can't say that truth is just a property of a word, of sentences. It's just abstract. No. The abstract world, we took the world and turned it into math. We took the world and turned it into words. It's not the other way around. It's not wordplay. It's not a word salad. You know, what we call the shop talk fallacy. This is not the case. He's misunderstanding where words come from. Words relate to real world empirical experiences. If it was the case that words were just, if truth was only a property of sentences, that would mean we would have an infinite regress of words. Words are taught to us via experience. We experience an object, we point to that object, we give it a sound to that object, and now that sound is associated with that object. Every word you put on a page represents something in the real world, and that represents some experience human beings have had. You can't just dismiss words as something abstract. They mean something.
But I think in this point you're trying to say also is that the words are reference or referent to something.
Correct.
In this context,
it's
Jay.
not just theoretical.
So, yeah. So here, true propositions exist. Yeah. So, you've got a sentence, and you're saying this sentence is not the same as the proposition. Is that right, Jake?
Yeah, because I gave the example that you can have multiple sentences in different languages, yet they express the same truth, right? Like I can say snow is white in English, and then if I knew French, I could say snow is white in
La neige
French.
est blanche.
Yeah,
La neige est blanche.
And there you go.
German.
So we got somebody who speaks French. So, and yet, if I asked you, Faraz, how many truths are being expressed? There's one truth because they express the same concept, the same idea, namely that snow is white, and yet there are two sentences. And my argument was as that means there's something more fundamental, which is true, than the sentences. In other words, the truth is not dependent upon the sentences. The sentences can express a truth, and there can be multiple different. I mean, I can do sign language if I knew how to do sign language and say snow is white in sign language. I can write it on a piece of paper. I can type it out here in the live chat. And you put all of those together. Oh, Jake, wow, he's such a genius. He's expressing so many truths. No, we would say he's expressing the same truth, but in different ways.
But and also, it corresponds to something. It corresponds to something. This is very important.
Yeah. And none of the sentences are identical, meaning the sentence in English is not the same exact letters or representations as French or English. So that means that there's something which is true, which is more fundamental than any one of the sentences or expressions of the truth. And that was my argument to Aron Ra, and it just went way over his head. He could not understand it.
Just on this question though, so is this like the law of identity when you say two sentences, they're not identical?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they're not.
The sentences or expressions of the truth, snow is white in English and snow is white in French, they're not identical, and yet there's one truth. So that means what is true cannot be identified with the sentence. The different sentences just express the truth, but the truth is singular and the sentences are many, right? So the problem that the atheist has, or the materialist, because there are some atheists like Alex Malpass that we've had on the program before, because of this argument and because of the force of this argument, he actually rejects materialism. But he takes a Platonist view. So he's an atheist, but he's a Platonist, right? At the same time. And the reason is because of this problem that there's nothing that is physical, whether it be the sentences or someone's brain state or anything else, that can account for these necessary truths. And so he has to posit this idea of the Platonic realm and the Platonic world. And this is where these propositions are. Now, I'm not saying that that position is correct. I think that that position has its own problems. But I'm saying at the very least, he recognizes the strength of this argument. And that's why he has to posit the Platonic realm and the Platonic world, because he sees that materialism cannot account for these necessary propositions.
Jake, can you do me a favor? Can you put up the quote from Aron Ra that you used to show there's a difference between what truth is?
Okay, yeah.
Because that quote is a very good quote. It really explains the point.
So this is it here. Yeah, so this is it here. And he kept, if you notice in the conversation, he kept going back and forth between what's called in philosophy the truth maker and the truth bearer. But I did research for the debate, and I watched hours of his videos, unfortunately. And he's somebody, and actually I mentioned this in the debate, My argument was partially inspired by him because he rattles on and on and on and about the truth. But I'm sitting here saying, you can't even, your position, your materialist position, you can't even account for the truth, right? So that's why what is called a transcendental argument. Part of it is going to foundational categories, which are sort of presupposed in language and in thought that humans rely on, that they cannot escape and they have to use, and which science itself is based on. So that was part of the reason for going to it.
They can. We'll talk about this later, but they cannot escape metaphysics. They absolutely need metaphysics. Well, we'll get to that later. They cannot escape metaphysics. Even science itself, hardcore materialist science, atheists, materialist scientists appeal to metaphysics at one point or later in their worldview. They cannot escape it. We'll talk about it later. But I want to read this statement here. It's actually quite.
You know what this statement made me appreciate the argument better.
Yeah,
Aron Ra is a philosopher par excellence. He doesn't know it though.
Before this, and we know Aron Ra doesn't know any epistemology. He doesn't know any metaphysics. All of that. However, this is what I wanted to show. I wanted to show his own statements actually support my argument, which shows what? Even his corrupted fitra from the Islamic conception, it's not completely dead, right? There's still something in there that he intuitively and that every human being understands. So this is what he says. He says, reality itself is not truth, but statements about reality can be if they're true. Now notice what he said, statements about reality.
Can we pause here a second? Can we, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
Reality, what does the word reality mean? Well, is reality false? Is reality of something false? Reality itself is not true. He just committed intellectual suicide. That's insane. That's an insane statement. That's an insane statement. Reality, by definition, what does it mean? Did Aron Ra have his own dictionary? Reality means what is out, what is the case. Guys, excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
Ring. Pardon me. So let me put on Do Not Disturb. Guys, the word reality has a meaning. He can't just come up now with his own dictionary and make up his own meanings.
But I think for
reality itself is not true.
Yeah, but for us, I think here the difference he's making implicitly,
Please
might not realize.
Please make me understand.
Yeah, he's saying that the whole debate about the microphone on the table. Yeah, the microphone on the table. What Aron is saying, that's neither true or false. The statement, the microphone on the table, is what we're going to call true or what we're going to call false. It's what we're going to give the truth value to, is to the statement, not to the reality.
Object.
Yeah, okay. The object.
Not to my sensory experience. Not to my sensory experience.
Well, yeah, not
you're having a sensory experience of a microphone on a table.
Yeah.
You claim that the microphone is on the table. Poof, you wake up, it was a dream. There was no microphone on the table. Well, it was true in my dream, but not true in reality.
Okay? No, but he's saying the object itself. So for example, we can say, okay, take away all human beings. So the ability to discern what's true or false. So you take away all human beings, you're gonna have reality. Yeah, you're gonna have things that
a standalone reality. Okay, you have a standalone reality. No problem. I'm with you. Go on.
But nothing in that reality is going to have a true value. It's not going to say this is true.
In other words, I don't say this phone is true, right? We don't say this phone is true or this phone is false. But if I say Jake has a phone, that statement is true.
I get it, guys. I'm very familiar with correspondence theory. I'm very, very familiar. I don't want to sound like but I can't say it's an oxymoron to say reality is not true.
So he's not saying that it's not true.
Okay, it is the case.
He's saying,
I understand. He's saying, look, I wanna judge your propositions about reality. Do they conform to reality? Do they correspond to reality? I get that. No problem there. But he's wording it in a way that makes no sense. Okay, maybe he could have went about it differently.
The first part is what's confusing when he says reality itself is not
what
true.
He should say, if you don't mind me, he should say, my experiences are not necessarily true. My experiences are not necessarily true. That's fine. I'm fine with that. Okay, because I agree that you can have false experiences. Like I could put a straw in a glass of water and the straw seems to bend. My experience is that the straw bends, but I know the straw is not bending. It's the reflection of the light off the water. It's bent by the water. Okay, the straw looks bent. It's an illusion. I can understand that. That's fine. He's not a wordsmith. Let's just say that. Okay. My experiences are not necessarily true. Statements about my experiences can be true or false. Okay, I'm fine with this. I think he might not have expressed himself well, but I can't say reality is not true, guys. I'm sorry. This is just nonsense. His experiences of the world may or may not be true. He's gonna make sentences. He's gonna propose truths, and we're gonna verify their truth claims after that. Because I'm with you. Not all sensory experiences are true. I look at a star. A star looks really, really tiny. It's actually huge, but from my distance, it looks really, really tiny. It seems like the sun goes around the earth. It's not true. It seems like that. It's not true. I make a statement about the sun going around the earth. It's false. I get that, but the way he's wording it, it just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
So please go on. Go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So what he said, reality itself is not truth, but statements about reality can be if they're true. And then he says, so if we have to determine whether it is true before we call it truth, then the truth is whatever statement can be shown to be true, and that's simple enough. In other words, he's saying, okay, we do research, okay, and we find out and we look and we say, okay, I make a claim. Now that statement is either true or it's false based on if it corresponds to reality. Now that part we can agree with. That's simple enough. But the problem is, and what I was using this quote for was to show that he's making a distinction between objects that exist and then the truth about those objects, which isn't necessarily problematic, but the problem is he's leaving it on the level of statements, that it's statements that are true about reality. And I'm saying, no, hold on a second. There's something more fundamental than the statements itself, because otherwise you have the problem of, which I think his position in reality resulted in, his position basically has to be there are no necessary truths. Because if truth is just a property of statements and all statements are contingent, then you cannot have any necessary truth. Mm-hmm. And that's why he had to deny. He at one point said, well, yeah, which is not true at all, by the way, but I didn't even get a chance to get into that. Well, they say in quantum physics that the law of non-contradiction doesn't hold up, which is not true at all.
That's nonsense.
And then he was saying, oh, well, 2 + 2 can equal to 5.
That's
right?
insane.
Which that's a topic we'll talk about later. But the reason why he had to say that is because he backed himself into a corner. If he says that what is true are statements, and all statements are a product of human language, of course, all statements are a product of human language, and human beings and every statement is contingent, then he can't commit himself to necessary
if there were no
truth.
human beings to make statements.
Exactly.
Truth doesn't exist. Okay, let's wipe out every human being. Okay, there's no more reason. That's absolutely, completely, utterly wrong.
Exactly.
It's unscientific. That's not scientific. That's not scientific thinking at all whatsoever. I mean, that's
so hold on. So are you saying if we take out all human beings, there are no true statements?
That's what his position would be. His position.
No. There's no, from what I'm reading here from this quote, only statements can be true or false.
Exactly.
Reality is
reality. So reality is neither true or false.
No, reality by definition is the case.
No. It
is the case.
Yeah. No. So reality. Yeah, we believe that reality exists. We all agree upon that. We believe it's true in terms of it exists. But I think this particular point in terms of Aron Ra, and I think what follows from Jake's argument is that they're making a distinction between truth as a truth bearers, so things that are propositions that hold truth, and the reality that exists that might make it that
by resting truth on statements. You're right, Jake. Then he's saying truth is contingent on
all truths have to be contingent.
All truths are contingent, so everything is relative. Everything is relative. If he falls down and breaks his leg and he's in agony and nobody makes a statement about it, it's not true he fell down and broke his leg. It's not true he fell down. If nobody, just don't say anything about it. It's
exactly.
Guys,
it only becomes true when he says it. See, this is the problem. That's why I said I asked him at one point, I don't know if you guys caught this part. I said, do you consider yourself a truth seeker? He said, yeah. I said, what are you seeking? To utter the correct sentence? Because that's what his position results in, is that it doesn't become true until someone else says it, which is absurd, right? And that was my whole point, that truth cannot be dependent on sentences, because that means, well, okay, if nobody came onto this live stream, or nobody announced that there was going to be a live stream, that would mean, oh, it's not true that there's going to be a live stream until Jake says it. No, that doesn't make sense. It's already programmed there. It's already going to happen. So this position, and this is why he had to make those silly statements later on. See, when people understand the argument and how it's connected, you see wait, some people are thinking, well, okay, Aron's an atheist, but really, is he that crazy that he wants to say, well, 2 + 2 can equal 5? And I'm telling you why he has to say that. Because he wants to say that truth is dependent upon statements. But if all statements are contingent, then you cannot have a necessary truth. That's why he has to deny all necessary truths, which then we can ask, is that statement that there are no necessary truths, is that necessary? And then he's got a problem.
What's he trained in? Can you guys tell me? I'm not familiar with him. What's he trained in?
Biology, I think.
He's a biologist. He's a biologist.
I don't think he's officially a biologist. I think he got some kind of degree in science. I'm not sure.
I don't want to be mean, okay? But science is predicated on the axiom that there's an objective truth out there. The truth is uniform. There are several axioms that are assumed in science. One of them is that there's objective truth. If everything is relative to our statements, why don't we all just become postmodernists now? All of a sudden, all I have to do is talk to you about how I feel, and that's how the world truly is. Guys, I'm in the world. I'm in the world of fighting. Okay, if you get punched in the face and you get knocked out and your jaw is broken, I don't care what when you revive yourself and you tell me, oh no, I didn't get hit, I didn't lose. No, you lost, man. There's a reality out there that's far beyond anybody. We talk a lot, and then we get in the ring and we fight. Okay, that's exactly. Reality. He's telling me, no, it's all about the talk. It's insanity. Okay, that's why I always tell people, all great civilizations wrestled. You know why? They didn't just talk. They got out there, they got on the mat. That's why I feel like people who get a high education, who never wrestled, they're out of touch with reality. The wrestling mat, I guess I don't want to talk about wrestling too much, but it teaches you a lot about reality. I don't care how you feel, what you think. The guy choked you. The guy slammed you on the mat. There's a reality out there, a standalone reality that doesn't care about your statements. It doesn't care about your statements.
Exactly.
And this is absurdity. I'm shocked the man is a scientist is making statements like this. Science is predicated on the fact that there's a standalone objective truth out there somehow, some way in the world, and we're trying to study it.
Yeah.
So reality is true. Yeah. It is the case that the world around us is such. I mean, this is insanity to me. Look, guys, I'm trying to be nice. I'm usually very nice. I just find this to be a bit crazy.
You were very nice to Joe Rogan anyway in your conversation with him. So let me try to unpack this, because it can seem a little bit complicated and a bit convoluted. So Aron Ra is saying, and because what it is, the way your argument works, Jake, is actually it's predicated upon what he already commits himself to.
Yeah.
Aron Ra is
saying, I was trying to show him, look, you already said this is where it's going. But when you look behind that curtain and you see where it's going, and that's God, you're not going to like it. I know he's not going to like it. Yeah. So I was trying to show him that what he's even saying, if you actually understand it properly and take it further, you either wind up in La La Land or you have God. There's only two options, right? So that's what I was trying to show him. But yeah, go ahead, Sharif.
So he's saying you've got reality. So there is a reality. You've got reality. But reality itself is not true or false. It's the statements you make about reality that makes it true or false. So if nobody makes,
pardon me, sure. Let me interject if you don't, and then I'll let you go.
Go.
I'm going to reword his statement. Okay, he says reality itself is not truth. I'm going to reword it. Okay, what is the case is not the case. Explain to me how I got that wrong. Reality, what is the case, is not truth. Truth is what is the case. What is the case itself is not the case. How could I go on? How could I move forward from here? Explain to me what I'm missing.
So I think what Aaron
What is the case? Reality
yeah.
is a synonym for reality is what is the case. What is the case is not, fill in the blank for me. What's his next word?
What is the case is not really what is the case. I think what he wants to say is this, is that he wants to say that you have reality.
What is the
And
case?
then-
Please use the
yeah.
words. What is the case?
Okay, you have what is the case, yeah.
Mhm.
But what is the case is not got a truth value.
But it is the case.
It's what you say about the reality that will be either true or false. So what you say about that reality is going to be the truth value or the truth.
Look, what is the case has a truth value because it is the case. By definition, it's true. What I say about it could be wrong or true. If it's in correspondence with what is the case, it's true. If it's not corresponding with what is the case, it's false. He's right.
Yeah.
Statements about reality, but when he says reality is not true, he that's insane.
I don't
It's
mean he's saying it's
completely wrong.
not true. He's
I
saying
think
it's not.
maybe he look, I'm going to be
Yeah.
charitable here. He misspoke. He misspoke. I'm nitpicking maybe, but he misspoke.
Yeah.
Okay. He's saying what is the case? Reality is the case,
Yeah.
but also your statements may not be accurate. That's it. Your statements about reality may or may not be accurate. They're contingent, and they may or may not be accurate. Okay, I agree. I agree with that.
But then see what it is that the entailments of his position, as we take it, would be if truth is the statements and there are no statements, then there are no truths.
Right.
Is that am I understanding that
The
correct?
truth is not, he's making it contingent on your statement. It's not
Yes.
contingent on your statement.
Yeah.
The case is there's a standalone reality. There's a standalone reality. You know, this is in the Quran. This is in the Quran. Listen, nobody stubs their toe in the middle of the night, feels an agony, and says, oh, this is not the case. No. I don't care I don't care. You know, I have a thought experiment I like to tell people. Imagine I walk downstairs in my living room and I stub my toe. And I think I stubbed my toe on the chair. But while I was sleeping, my wife, she moved around the furniture, and it wasn't the chair, it was the coffee table. I'm mistakenly believing that I stubbed my toe on the chair. I'm wrong about that. However, I'm 100% certain I have agony. I have pain. I could be certain about my direct experience. I'm 100% certain. I'm wrong about my statement that, hey, I stubbed my toe. I'm in a dark room now. I stubbed my toe on the chair. I'm wrong. It was actually the coffee table. Right? My statement is incorrect. Yes or no? It's incorrect. But the pain, my direct experience, whether I utter it, whether I tell people or not, is immediate and true. I don't have to give a statement about my pain for it to be a reality.
Yeah. No, that's right.
Yeah. So he's hinging truths on statements. No, that means there's no standalone truths. There are standalone truths that don't require statements. The truth existed before human beings uttered any sentences.
Yes.
So I don't understand why he's making them contingent on sentences.
I think this is where Jake's going towards when he says statements. There's something more fundamental than statements.
Of course, there's something more fundamental.
Because of course we agree that there was truth before any statements. There was truth before there's any humans, and that's why at one point I actually asked him. I said, "Okay, Aron Ra, is it true that God does not exist?" He said, "Yeah, it's evidently true." He actually said, "Yeah, it's evidently true." And I said, "Okay, was it always true? Always true that God did not exist?" And then he started waffling. Why did he start waffling now? Because he already backed himself into a corner. If he says that truth is dependent on statements, well, there wasn't always statements. So then that means that the proposition that God does not exist could not always be true. It became true when whoever the first person to utter that sentence. That's why his position is just nonsense.
But guys, he's taking a sophist position. Man is the measure of all things. He's not taking a scientific paradigm. This is not a scientific paradigm. This is what we call sophistry. Man is the measure of all things. What I see is the truth. That's what's true. Why? Because that's pragmatism. That's what benefits me. That's what the world is moving to, and we're desperately trying to tell people, look, sophistry is a dead end. You know, it's gonna create division, etc. But this is not a scientific paradigm. Science doesn't say, hey, it's all about your statements. No. There's a standalone truth. Science, the world of science, believes there's a standalone truth. There's a world out there that we can study and that is uniform. I don't know why he's bringing this up. Like, this is a poor
Well,
attempt.
I'm telling you why. I'm telling you why, Frost. Because if he says that there's something more fundamental than the
Right.
statements, then he's going to have the problem of
Necessary truths.
Exactly. And then if it's a necessary truth, you need something which is necessary and eternal to account for that, which we say is God. So that's why you either have God or you have absurdity. This is what I'm trying to show people, is that he winds up having to say, well, yeah, it's true that God does not exist, but it wasn't always true. Well, really? I mean, that's what you want to say as an atheist? It wasn't always true that God does not exist? This sounds like nonsense. You see?
The thing is, with Aaron, he's a reactionary. So a lot of his positions, I think, when he's engaging in conversations with theists, is just like to put himself against the theist. But when he's talking to other atheists, I don't think he would hold these same positions. He probably contradicts himself quite a lot. But I can't help but feel like he just wants to disagree with those who believe. And so he gets himself in these conundrums and ends up kicking himself in the foot. Kicking his own feet from underneath him.
Look, can I ask you guys a question? Let me ask you guys a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I would go about it a little bit differently than him because he's not trained to understand these kind of arguments. I don't think he is, to be honest with you. But I mean, you can go about it so many ways. You know, I'd want to go in a language that he could understand. Okay, imagine the entire world was one particular shade of pink. The entire world. Would you know anything about the color blue, red? You wouldn't even notice pink because pink would just be there. You wouldn't be able to contrast anything with the color pink. Pink would just be your reality. You wouldn't say, hey, there's pink. Because imagine a world of complete darkness, no light. You wouldn't be like, hey, we're in the dark. No, you would only know you're in the dark if somebody turned on the light, showed you around, and then turned off the light. You'd be like, wait a second, I have a contrasting experience. I saw light, I saw darkness, and I'll have this contrasting experience. This is in the Quran. Allah teaches us via the opposites. Suppose you lived in a world where everything was a shade of pink, and then one day you came across a garden where there was the color blue. You'd be like, wait a second, what is this blue? I now can see pink, and now I can see blue. You would never know the color pink if the world was one particular shade of pink. Yes or no? Now, we're talking about truth and falsehoods. Truth and falsehoods. If everything was false, I wouldn't know anything about truth. I had to experience truth, and I had to experience falsehood, and I had to have an opposite. Now I know they're two opposites. Okay? If the whole world was floating upwards, we wouldn't know it. We'd have to go up and then down, and we'd be like, wait a second. I went up, now there's down. Wait a second, these two are opposites. We cannot know opposites unless we experience both sides of the opposites. You cannot know truth. We're always talking about this thing, truth. What's truth? Let me tell you what truth is, okay? In epistemology, we know that there are axioms. In science, we don't prove the axioms. In science is founded on the belief that the future will behave like the past. Anybody who's a philosopher of science knows this. This is basic information. I'm not breaking new ground. When I talked about it on Joe Rogan, people were having a fit. Guys, this is basic logic. Aristotle knew it, mentioned it. Ghazali talked about it. And atheist David Hume wrote a whole book about it. He said when Kant read Hume's work, he said, he awoken me from my dogmatic sleep. We all believe in this. The atheists, the Muslims, the pagans, we all agree to this. It's circular reasoning. Science is based on an axiom that Hume, an atheist, called circular reasoning. You think that the future is going to behave like the past because in the distant past, you saw that the future behaved like the past. It's circular. We can't get around it. It's inductive reasoning. By the way, after hearing him talk, I realized that he doesn't know the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Maybe we'll hit on that later, but he doesn't know even the basics of epistemology. Okay, so I'm trying to be nice to him here. Okay, science is founded on axioms. Science is founded on axioms, and these axioms are not proven. They're faith-based. They're seen as evident or self-evident, even though, as John Searle says, very well-known materialist philosopher, who says, look, they're blind animal faith. He admits it. He's an Actually, I think he's an atheist. I'm not even sure, but he's a materialist philosopher. He says, look, they're blind. It's blind animal faith. The axioms that we rest science on, guys, there's no scientific evidence that science is true. There's no scientific experiment that it's not proof. Science didn't prove itself. Science rests on what we call in philosophy axioms. Some people consider them to be self-evident truths. Some people consider them to be just blind faith. But ultimately, the axiom, even Dave Hume, a real hardcore atheist, says, look, it's circular reasoning. Science is based on a type of circular reasoning. If they can accept their axiom that the future will behave like the past, you guys are well-founded to believe that God exists. God is a necessary self-evident truth. What's the evidence for God? Existence. Existence itself. Look, the fact that a world exists, I believe that there has to be a necessary truth. Like you say, everything in the world is contingent. I believe that there's a necessarily truth, an unmoved mover, as Aristotle called it, something that had no start. What could it be? Guys, by the way, this is Leibniz's argument. He's one of the great intellects of the world. All thinkers, all theists made this argument. Leibniz says, look, what could be the one thing that started at all, that doesn't need a start? That's self-explanatory. God. If God had a start, he wouldn't be a God. It has to be God. There's no other possibility. You guys are well-founded to say, look, you go in a debate and say, look, you have your axioms that the future will behave like the past, that the world is uniform. I accept these axioms. It's in the Quran. The Quran tells us to accept these axioms. And we'll talk about this. Is very interesting. The Quran makes the best arguments. It's unfortunate that Muslims don't understand it. The Quran is telling us, look, there's patterns and regularities in nature. They're going to be like that in the future. How did you come to life? You were dead and now you're living. And there's a dialogue in the Quran. How are we going to come back to life? Do you really think Allah is going to bring back our bones when they're dust? Allah says, yes, like I did the first time. We also believe that the future will behave like the past. We also have this faith. So but it's a faith. For us to say, walk in a debate and say, look, I consider that everything being contingent is an impossibility. It's a logical impossibility. You have the problem of infinite regress. The problem of infinite regress can only be solved by a necessary being. We can take that as self-evident. We cannot have infinite regress. Now, if they don't accept our axioms, they don't have to. They don't have to accept our axioms. We see our axiom as self-evident. How could it be contingent? You cannot have a collective of contingent things. Contingent things mean that they came from somewhere. They have an explanation. There's only one possibility. We're using deductive reasoning now. That you have to have a universe with a God. Existence entails God. Now, what I was talking about, contrast, we all, in the Quran it says we all gave a shahada. In the Quran says, look, God asked us in a pre-existence, who's your Lord? All of mankind. All of us who said, you're our Lord. Then we go into this world and we have this innate belief, like they have an innate belief. The axioms are innate. Guys, Einstein admitted to this. Einstein says innate beliefs are a gift. Reason is the servant of innate beliefs. Even the most hardcore atheists accept this. If they can accept an axiom, we can accept an axiom. We're on equal footing. They're not superior to us at all in any shape or form. Guys, you don't have to ask for their permission. We see it as necessary being. By definition, is necessary. There can only be one type of necessary being. He'd have to be a God. He'd have to be the God. Now, also, God is the only thing that is absolutely true. Everything we're going to find in nature, in science and mathematics and everything is going to have some type of flaw. There is no perfect truth out there. We're going to talk about paradoxes shortly, I'm sure. When we say truth, we're referring to God. We are referring to God. When I say something is true, I don't believe there's any atheists. Okay, I always tell atheists, you're in denial of God. You're just a type of denial. Because once you talk about truth, you're talking about Allah. There's only one thing in the world that is objectively true. And I can give you a thought experiment to prove that, but I've been talking too long. I'm gonna let you guys chime in. But things are known via contrast. If we're talking about something is true, we had experience with truth. Now show me what is perfectly 100% true. I'm always going to find some type of doubt. Guys, all of Ghazali's work is founded on this, okay? You had the senses, then you had the intellect, and then he discovers intuition. That's why I find he's one of the greatest thinkers in history, because he brought us. All their beliefs are based on axioms. Their axioms are not justified. They're either considered to be self-evident, or they're taken by faith. Some are self-evident and some are taken by faith. You guys are well justified to walk into a debate and say, look, we don't accept that everything is contingent. It's illogical. It is illogical. Only one thing can be necessary and start the whole chain.
Just like for us, that was a very impassioned plea and points that you made, alhamdulillah. But I just want to go back to the first quote of Aron, and I want to understand what because Jake, you made this point as well using this quote about truth bearer and truth maker. Yeah. Maybe it's not related to this quote, but as in generally.
Mm-hmm. No, it's related. Like we say, the truth maker is that which makes something true, right? So I was trying to explain it to him in the case of the microphone on the table. What makes it true is the fact that it's on the table, right? It exists. It has these properties, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the truth bearer is that which is true. Now, he wants to say that's just sentences. I'm saying no, it's something more fundamental than sentences. It's a proposition. Now, a sentence can express a proposition, but a proposition is prior to language, right? It's something that is not linguistic. A sentence is a linguistic expression of a truth.
Just on that point. So, from what I understand, you guys have been saying is, if what contains the truth, if what contains the truth is a sentence, and nobody utters the sentence, then nothing contains truth.
That's what his position would result in. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I told him, you're not a truth seeker, Aron. Your position is you are a truth creator. You are, in your position, you are creating truth when you utter different sentences that you say are true. And he couldn't grasp that. He said, yeah, I'm a truth seeker. I said, well, if you're a truth seeker, that means that the truth is already out there. It already exists, and you're seeking to find it. But your position is, no. You can't be a truth seeker. You are a truth creator. Now, of course, astaghfirullah, we don't believe that. We don't believe that that's what he's doing. But I'm using this as a rhetorical device to explain what his position actually results in. He's not a truth seeker. He's a truth creator because he's seeking to utter the correct sentence. In other words, it's not true until Aron Ra says it's true, or it's not true until Jake says it's true. Well, this is ridiculous.
So he's become a sophist, guys. No offense, but this is sophistry. This is a position of science. It has nothing to do with science. I thought we were talking about a guy he has a scientific worldview. This is insanity, guys. I'm sorry to tell you. Like, this is pure insanity. Let's go to the next segment.
Let me understand this. Sorry, I don't, because I think this is quite a critical point for the audience to appreciate. Because it can be a little bit. So he's saying that the truth is contained in a sentence.
Yeah.
If nobody utters the sentence,
it's not true.
If nobody utters a sentence ever, there is no truth.
Exactly.
There is no truth.
Exactly. That's why he was stuck. That's why he's stuck. He has to say there's no necessary truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he's made a distinction between truth maker and truth bearer implicitly. He doesn't know these terms, but he's making this implicit distinction between the two. Yeah. There's something that makes something true, and then there's something that is or carries the truth, is the truth. Yeah, which is according to him a statement. You then talked to, and I think we'd mentioned this at the beginning of the show, sort of towards the beginning anyway, about how sentences can be. You can have multiple sentences, but they all point to one truth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So if you have multiple sentences like the snow is white, I don't know what that was in French again, but if you got it in French and you got it in English. Yeah. What's it in German, Yusuf?
Yeah, sorry, pardon me. Just wait. I have to check on my daughter. 1 minute, please.
No problem.
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
The German was the Schnee is weiß.
The Schnee is weiß. Right.
Yeah,
so you got the Schnee is weiß, the snow is white, and you've also got it in French, which Faraz inshallah will be able to explain to us, These three things, they're the sentences. According to Aron Ra, he would be saying that those three things are what carries the truth. Yeah.
Mhm.
Are the
Yeah.
truth, are the things that say this is true and this is false. This is a truth
Those are
value.
the true bearers. Yeah.
Yeah, truth bearers. The truth bearers, yeah, the things that make it, or not make it true, but the things that truth out there that you're trying
They
to
have the
discover.
property of truth.
Yeah, the truth that you're trying to discover is not a sentence. Yeah,
Mhm.
the truth
Yeah.
that you're trying to discover is a proposition.
Mhm.
Is that right?
According to me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if it's to do with a sentence, if you're trying to discover truth and you're saying truth is a sentence, then all you're trying to do is discover a sentence. But if there's nobody that makes that sentence, you're not discovering anything, because there's nobody who's made that sentence. But what you're saying, Jake, is that there is a truth that you can discover. It's a proposition, something that
Yeah.
comes before sentences, something that sentences point to. It's the
Yeah,
one
yeah.
thing that's the truth.
There's a standalone truth. There's an independent truth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is the proposition. The proposition is that truth. Yeah.
Yeah, because in the case of the sentence, right, you can have a sentence that's true or it could be false. Somebody could say something that's false. So a sentence can be true or false, but also a belief can be true or false.
Of
Which
course.
shows what? If a belief can be true or false, and a sentence can be true or false, then sentences are not the thing which the truth is dependent upon. It's not the thing which has the primary property of truth. It only has the property of truth because it expresses a proposition. In other words, the beliefs that I have that are true, and the sentences that I express that are true, even if it could be the same truth, both the belief and the sentence could express the same truth. And that's because what they have in common is a proposition, right? It's the content, it's the undergirding thing that is behind both of those two things, which is true. And then ultimately, of course, I say that in terms of the necessary truths, you need something which is like God or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is accounting for those necessary truths, that is grounding those necessary truths or propositions. But he was so stuck on the sentence, he couldn't get past that. I'm saying, yeah, of course. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, sentences can't be true. Of course, a sentence can be true or false. But that's not it. You cannot stop there, because if you stop there, then you have the problem of, well, you don't have any necessary truths, or it's not true until I say it's true, and you have all of these absurd problems.
Okay, so should we go back to the argument again, Jake, that you laid out?
Yeah, sure. Because I think we've beat Aron Ra's statement here to death. I think the poor guy he's gonna want to scribble this out and write a new.
Look, let's chuck it up. Let's be charitable. He misspoke. He misexpressed himself. Let's try to be charitable. I want to be charitable to the guy. If he's accredited scientist, I have respect for his domain. I'm a big believer in science. I'm not a science denier in the least. But there's a philosophy of science. There's an epistemology underneath science, and we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with what does science bring to the table, and what are its limitations.
Yeah. So the first premise that necessarily either the law of non-contradiction is true or false. Yeah, we can accept that first premise. The second premise is, well, if based upon that first one, there must be at least one true necessary truth. That's fine. True propositions exist. So statements are not the bearers of the truth. Propositions are the bearers of the truth. When we say we're truth seekers, what we're really doing is we're looking for a proposition. Yeah. Like if we're treasure seekers, we're looking for treasure. But here we're looking for truth. So it means we're looking for a proposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you say, so I don't know if you want to carry on. So then you say, therefore, there's at least one true proposition exists necessarily. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because, for example, you can take law of non-contradiction, or 2 + 2 = 4, or anything that the common normal person with the correct intuitions would say, yeah, this is true, and it's necessarily true. I mean, it can't be false.
So maybe I was going to say maybe an abstract mathematical example, although we don't make this too complicated, but it might make it more simpler, because an abstract. So, for example, if we were to turn around and say, actual infinites, exist. Yeah. What we're really saying is that the proposition is true about this abstract entity. It's not something you see in the physical world. It's
Yeah, you don't
something
put it
that
in a
may be
test tube.
seen outside. Sorry, in an abstract realm. Yeah. So there's a proposition that we can discover even before anybody utters a statement. That proposition exists. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you
Right.
say proposition. So this thing that exists called a proposition, which contains, you're then saying it's got mental entities. For us, if you want to
Yeah,
jump in and just, you know,
Uh,
answer or raise those points as
I
well.
think the problem is that when we're using the word truth, sometimes we're using it in one sense and sometimes we're using it in another.
yeah.
Sometimes we'll call this a false equivocation. See, in my view, I'm gonna have to give you guys a thought experiment to explain to you my view. Okay, and I think after you get this thought experiment, you'll understand what I mean when we go through these propositions. Okay. I want to ask you guys, is truth objective or is it subjective?
It's objective.
It's objective.
Mhm.
Truth is objective.
Mhm.
If it's subjective, then it's relative, etc. We believe there's a standalone truth. We believe there's a reality. And it's not all your opinion and it's not all the shade of blue. No. There's a real standalone objective truth. Okay. Now I'm going to give you a thought experiment about the ship of thesis. We're going to run through it. And then you guys, I think, will understand what I mean when I say the word true, what it means exactly. Okay. The ship of thesis, I'm sure, I don't know if you guys heard about it before. It's a ship with 99 pieces.
Yeah.
Every day I have to change a piece. So I'm sailing with this ship. Day 1, I change piece 1. Day 2, I change another piece. Day 3, I change another and another and another. After 99 days, I have brand new pieces. I've been sailing every day. Everybody's waving to me. Oh, you're on the ship of thesis today. Every day I'm on the ship of thesis. Everybody calls that ship the ship of thesis. All those pieces that I changed, I put them in a warehouse somewhere, and now I reassemble them. All the original pieces. And now there are 2 ships on the sea. Which one is the ship of thesis? Well, it's subjective. Some people say the first one, some people say the second one, some people say after you changed one piece, it was no longer the ship of thesis. We have a huge debate. It's subjective. Your opinion is just as good as mine. And you know what? The second ship is also changing pieces every day. And there's a third ship of thesis and a fourth ship of thesis, etc., etc., etc. There's a never-ending ship of thesis, and we cannot agree. We cannot agree which one is the ship of thesis. Your definition is as good as mine. Now picture this for a moment. The divine ship of thesis. The divine ship of thesis never changes. The divine ship of thesis always existed, will always exist. It doesn't go through any flux. It does not fluctuate in the least. Now, if I ask all of us, what's the ship of thesis? We all point to that ship. There's no more debate. It's become objectively true. It's no longer subjective. There's no longer a metaphor. You see, human beings, we're like the ship of thesis. I was once a little boy, now I'm a man. Every cell in my body's been changed, just like every element of the ship of thesis, every part of the ship of thesis was changed. I've gone through many gradual changes. And not only that, there are other men out there. So you have a type of emergence. You have a type of a prototype. This is what a man is. Maybe he has a beard. He has 5 fingers. He's about this tall. There's an essence to man. It's what we call in philosophy the essence. Now, the essence is not perfectly defined. It's kind of subjective. Every human being is part phenomenon, body, flesh, but also there's a concept attached to you. If I see a picture of Jake when he's a little boy, I don't say that's not Jake. I say, no, that's Jake in a time and place. Jake is part ship and part metaphor. He's part human being, physical, and there's a duality. There's a duality to Jake. Every human being has a duality. Yet, not the divine ship of thesis. The divine ship of thesis, there's no metaphor to him. This is objectively true. This is what I mean. When I say true, I'm talking about Allah. Allah is Al-Haq. In Islam, we call him Al-Haq, the truth. He's not subjective in the least. So when I tell people I don't believe in atheists, is because the second they talk about truth, in my mind, if what I understand, they have to be talking about Allah, because we never saw anything true in the world. We never saw anything objectively true. Show me one objective truth in the world. You can't find it. Why? Like we said earlier, you only know left because you know right. You'll only know up because you also experience down. You cannot know the opposites until you experience both opposites. You know that things in the world are trying to be true. They're trying to be objectively true because you experience. This is why the Quran it's very profound. The Quran is telling you are born with the innate belief in God. You have experience with God. So the truth, for something to be completely objective, guys, for something to be completely objective, it has to be never changing. It has to be eternal. Everything that the Quran tells you about Allah, that's what it's telling you. Allah, when Allah says He's one, He's telling you, I'm objective. I'm not like you, Jake. You, Jake, are made of parts. Parts that, okay, let me ask you a question, guys. If I show you a knife made of plastic, and I show you a knife made of metal, and I show you a knife made of cardboard, and I show you a picture of a knife, you say, look, all these knives have something in common. They have an essence. They're part something physical, and they're part essence, which is a metaphor. There's an idea attached to them, and that idea is never perfectly defined. You are part subjective, you are part objective. You're a collage, you're a mist, you're like a ship of thesis. For something to be true, if you believe truth exists, you believe in Allah, you believe in God, the one God that's never changing. He never went through flux. Now, Adam, when he was only one man, alayhi salam, he was going through changes. He was learning, he was adapting. There's a metaphor. The second he changes, the human beings are always in flux. The second something is in flux, we have to attach a metaphor. Once you attach a metaphor, it's not 100% objective anymore. The metaphor is a type of mist. It's a projection of the mind. It's never 100% true. Nothing is truly singular except God. Hence, there's only one objective perfect truth. There's only one objective perfect truth, and that is God. So when we go through the words truth here, what I'm hearing is everything is, in the Quran it says it beautifully, everything is praising Allah. The whole universe is praising Allah because you're seeing essence. You're seeing this. The whole world is the ship of thesis. And you only know that because you had experience with God. You had experience with objective truth. If all I showed you was subjectivity, you wouldn't know anything about objectivity. You cannot deduce its opposite. Like you couldn't deduce light from darkness. If you lived in a world of just darkness, you would never know anything about light until somebody turns on the light switch. When somebody turns on the light switch, you're like, wait a second, I was in the dark. I didn't know. Oh, look, I like this light thing. You would never, if you were blind your entire life, you would never deduce color. You would never deduce light. You had to see light, you had to see darkness, and you realize, hey, light is the absence of darkness. You would now find, hey, these two are opposites. They're never together in the same place. They're exclusive. Think about it like this. I always like to tell people, think about it like this. Every number, there's only one real number in the world, the number 1. Because every other number is referencing 1. So if I tell you 0.5, that means half 1. If I tell you 10, that means 1, 1, 1, 10 times. I'm always referring to the root number. The root number is 1. You cannot have truth unless something is actually perfectly true. There's only one thing that could be perfectly true. There's no other thing. Please, somebody offer me another truth. Even Bertrand Russell, I quoted him even on Joe Rogan. Even Bertrand Russell said, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bertrand Russell, okay? He tried, in a reaction to Kant, he was trying to prove an objective truth, and he couldn't, okay? It's called Bertrand Russell's paradox. Look it up, okay? He could never get to it. He tried to use math. He thought, hey, I can use math to get to perfect truth. He has a great saying, a saying I love. He says, look, to a trained mind, math is like saying, it's akin to saying, a 4-legged animal is an animal. It's just a big tautology. Saying 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 is just another way of saying 2. It's a tautology. You think you're learning something. It's actually, if you hadn't, mathematics doesn't tell us anything true. It's just a discovery we make in our own minds. It was already true before you discovered it. It was already true before you discovered it. Guys, whenever somebody talks about truth, you're talking about something that doesn't change, that's eternal, that's perfectly objective, aren't you not? Like you said earlier, truth didn't come into being. It had to be always true.
Yeah.
God is literally true. So you cannot have something that's subjective and it be true. The second you introduce subjectivity, now it's relative. It's relatively true. It's not objectively true. Now, for instance, if I tell you, look, there's a coffee cup on this table, and we all agree to it. Now we have consensus. Consensus is depending on it depends on our experiences of that cup. So what? You have consensus. Maybe our senses are not detecting reality as it is. It's not objective. It's subjective to our experiences. Every time there's something subjective, it's contingent. We have to keep going back and back. And we have an infinite regress till we find something concrete. Your entire argument is basically saying what I'm saying right now. I'm rewording it with a thought experiment because I find thought experiments are superior. Thought experiments are superior than logical arguments because logical arguments, people have no experience with them. They're not trained logicians. You're talking to an audience who's not trained in logic, not formally trained in logic. Everybody's logical. People are logical, yes, but they're not trained in formal logic. Okay, it takes a long time to wrap your mind around these things. Thought experiments, in my opinion, are better. When you say the word truth, you're talking about something that's perfectly objective. Please go ahead and show me something that's perfectly objective. It's always dependent on the human experience, and that's contingent. Hence, it is not perfectly objective.
So Jake, on that point then about hypothesis, because that's the interesting point that Faraz mentioned, because it sort of gives me the impression about propositions and statements, because you can keep changing the statements, but that proposition remains the same. And the proposition is almost like it's not even, like the proposition is not made up of words. Like the hypothesis is not really made up of. Is that correct for us? It's not really
we have a
made
tangible
up of
experience.
the word.
We have a tangible thought experiment.
Yeah.
Now, if something is true, do you believe in truth? If you say no, what are you denying? Yeah. That's why radical skeptics have to remain silent. If I ask a radical skeptic, do you believe in truth? He has to not talk. The second he utters a word, he proves my statement. Because to deny something, that means you believe that reality is another way. You're making a statement. You're affirming something. It's a self-defeating position to deny truth. We all accept truth exists. Now, what is truth? We said earlier, you guys made me an oath that truth is objective. You're not going to come and tell me after truth is subjective. It can't be. Truth cannot be subjective. By definition, that doesn't make it true. Truth has to be perfectly objective, guys. Let me tell you a little secret, okay? Everybody believes in God. Every single human being in history. There are no such thing as atheists. Atheism is a veiled type of polytheism. I can get into it if you guys want. It's a type of polytheism. I'll say it publicly. I'll debate anybody about it. They believe in many gods. They believe in they believe in absurdities. We'll get to that later. Look, guys, I respect atheists, but this is my worldview. They have their worldview. They think I believe in absurdities. I think they believe in absurdities. I'm not trying to attack them personally. Okay, I believe atheism is a failed form of polytheism. I'm ready to defend that position. Anybody wants to challenge me? When you say the word truth, you're admitting that something is perfectly, objectively the case. It's true. There's only one thing that fits that description. That's why the Quran is telling you the most important truth is God is one. The second you make him in a trinity, you added a metaphor to him. You added now something that there's an essence now. There is now an interpretation. No. God is singular and unchanging. It always was the case. It always will be the case. There's no essence to God. There's no essence in the sense that knives have essence. There's no essence to God like the dunya has essence. Anything in the dunya. Okay. Now, I remember Aron Ra saying, look, show me objective truth about God. Show me objective truth. Guys, the Quran said long before the existence of science, it said, God is not in the dunya. You're not going to look under a rock one day and find God. That's not what we say. When we mean God, that's not what we're saying. God is outside, is not in the dunya. Science only tells us what's in the dunya, in the material world. Science tells us about patterns and regularities found in nature. That's the core of science. It doesn't make any statements about God. It doesn't. It doesn't train you in epistemology, as evidently we see with Aron Ra. When somebody talks about they believe in truth, they're telling you indirectly that they believe in God. That's why there is no such thing as an atheist. They just don't understand. They're in denial. That's the truth. In my opinion, I'm ready to defend this. Please bring any atheist you like. I'm ready to defend this This is what I truly believe, and I find it to be there's no other possibility.
Yeah, well, it's a correct position as well, isn't it? Because the Quran doesn't really address atheists, but it does address those who worship their own desires or worship things in the world. And so that, like, if you deny God and take him out of your value system, you end up valuing other things more.
The problem is worse than that, Yusuf. You see, here's how you can cut him at the knees. Okay, I believe in truth. I believe in a God. What does he believe in? Tell me what he believes in. He believes in, let's say, gravity. He believes in forces. These forces are inferred. Gravity, listen carefully, gravity is never directly observed. We see a pattern irregularity. We see guys, please do me a favor. Bring me the most trained philosopher of science, please. Because people, when they hear this, they think I thought of this myself. This is not me, okay? This is David Hume, Kant, Ghazali, Aristotle. Pick me any famous philosopher. They agree to what I'm telling you. Gravity is never directly observed. I'm going to say that again. Every single force that they believe in is never directly observed. It's inferred. You guys are just on the same footing to say, oh, look, there's existence, therefore there must have been a necessary existence. You're making an inference. I believe we have direct knowledge of God, intuitive knowledge of God, but also you have the right to make this inference. You're on equal footing with them. They're inferring gravity. I'm inferring an almighty God. They're both inferences. It's not true that they put gravity in a test tube and they weighed it. No. They measure its effects. I'm going to put that in quote. They infer a force. That's why I don't believe in natural forces. I don't believe in natural forces whatsoever. I believe the Quran is very, this is not my own view. This is a view called nominalism. In nominalism, we don't accept universals. I don't know if you guys want to talk about universals, but I think it can shed some light on this perspective.
Yeah. I don't know where Jake is. No, I think universals and nominalism is a big topic, and
it's a big topic.
It is a huge topic. But just Jake, there was a question I wanted just to address this particular question actually, because it was where is it gone now? It was a claim that truth is not a concept; it's something that's discovered. I think it was there we go. There it is. So. Truth is not a concept. Truth is discovered. So truth is not a mental entity. And I think it goes back to one of the premises of the argument, which is this idea that so we're saying propositions exist. Faraz mentioned the point about the shipper thesis and the fact that the proposition remains the same, but the statements might change about that proposition, about that truth. So there's something called a proposition, which is that truth bearer. But this person is saying, free naturally, is saying, well, truth is not a concept. It's something that is discovered. It doesn't need a proposition attached to it. So why are you saying it's a mental entity?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to talk to him more directly to see what his concept of truth is and what he's actually trying to say. But my claim is that truth is a mental entity. However, truth fundamentally is with God. It's grounded with God. And when we access truth, we're sort of thinking, this is a Christian expression, but it has relevance in this case. We're thinking God's thoughts after him. In other words, we're accessing that higher truth, which is God himself. Now, if he doesn't believe that, fine, but then he's going to need to account for what he believes is truth. He says truth is what's discovered. Okay, so then you're disagreeing with Aron Ra, and you're saying truth is independent of our sentences. Okay, what is that then? What is that thing which is truth, which is independent of everyone's sentences and isn't dependent upon how we feel or what we say or what we think?
There's an even bigger problem. He discovered something in the world. It's dependent on his perception. It's a contingent truth. It's, again, subjective. He's saying, look, truths are discovered. Let's all come here and see how many cups are on this table. We all count one. There's one cup. That's contingent. We still haven't found the necessary truth. That's contingent on our experience. It could be the case that I'm a madman in a rubber room somewhere, thinking I'm talking to an audience of people, and we're all counting this cup. Now, I can give you 100 other optical illusions, and there was consensus many times throughout history. There was a time the scientific community believed in ether. Nobody believes in that anymore. We had consensus. Tomorrow, truths may be overturned. We can have unanimous consensus. Guys, inductive reasoning, science, it's a beautiful art. But it never has, in science, we never have the totality of evidence. You cannot say that's objectively 100% true. That's to the best of our knowledge what we discovered. Hence, again, we haven't found objective truth. We still have to go further back. Guys, I've went all the way. When you go further back, when you have a regress, back, eventually there's only one thing that is perfectly, objectively true. There can be no other possibility. It's only God. God is, when we say truth, they're telling you they believe in God. It couldn't be the case if everything was subjective and relative. We wouldn't have truth, objective truth. You guys told me earlier truth is objective. You guys told me earlier, I asked you, is it objective or subjective? You know you can't answer subjective. You'd be shooting yourself in the foot. That's a self-defeating position. The fact that truth is objective, we can only relate it back to one thing actually being true. Maybe this is too deep for people. We can go about it different ways, but I find that
for us, if I understand what you're saying here on this particular point, is we are all subjective human beings. We might misunderstand the reality and what's true about the reality. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. We're contingent. We're limited. We might misunderstand the reality. But if we want to say we believe that there is truth, there is objective truth, then it needs to have a grounding. Now, the grounding can't be me, you, or consensus. It has to be something out there, which is objective.
No, I'm not just saying that.
That objective truth.
Okay,
which is God.
We agree that consensus is not guaranteed for truth.
Yeah.
Right? I'm telling you that this cup is on the table. Okay. I have to define what a cup is. What do you mean by cup? All of a sudden now we're in the world of Plato. We're in the forms. We can never perfectly, objectively. Look, if I asked you, do you have an odd or even number of hairs on your head? It's one or the other, right? Then we're going to dispute on what a hair is. Some people are going to be like, wait, I have a different count than you. I consider this one to be a poil, not a hair, even though they're going to make up a word. This is not a hair. No. This is we're not going to come to the exact same conclusion. Guys, don't make me go throughout history and tell you all the great minds contradicted one another. Sooner or later, they contradicted one another. Did Plato agree with Aristotle? No, he didn't. Did Schopenhauer, did Schrödinger agree with Heisenberg? No, he didn't. All great intellects, we don't agree. Whose logic are we going to use? This is Ibn Taymiyyah point. Whose logic, or who's the perfect logician? We always find a type of fault, subjectivity. Consensus is not guarantee. Consensus is not a guarantee of certainty. So we keep going back. Okay, what did it? If truth is dependent on your flawed logic, it's still contingent. But you told me truth exists. We cannot deny truth. When you can't deny truth, and I'm telling you, God is literally the truth. That's why one of the names of God is
Al-Haq.
Al-Haq. In Islam, Allah is true. Everything else.
Yeah, it reminds me of this ayah. I just wanted to share because that's a point we've been mentioning, especially you've been mentioning several times. So let's just read this verse. It comes to mind when you mention that. It says, "For that is Allah, your Lord, the truth. And what can be beyond truth except error? So how are you averted?" Right. So I think this is a verse. Yeah, I think this verse is sort of sums up exactly what you're saying. Would you agree?
100%.
Do you mind if I just jump in?
Yeah,
sure. Go ahead.
So can you bring up that comment again, and then can you bring up your argument? So I think the issue here is there's two different directions we can talk about when it comes to talking about truth. So you're talking about engaging with the external world and you're finding things and whether or not these things are true. But if you go back to premise one, the point is that these laws, like for example, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, the law of identity, these aren't things that you find in the world. So it's not that you're to direct yourself to the dunya. Exactly. So you when it comes to these truths, you're not directing yourself towards the dunya. This is why it's called a transcendental argument, You're sort of moving away from the world
Mm-hmm.
to talk about more fundamental things. So when you're saying like truth is discovered and that it's not a mental entity, the whole point of this argument is that, well, these truths are not truths you find in the world. You're finding them somewhere. And then when we're talking about the distinction between the truth maker and the truth bearer, which is why you brought up that quote as well, is to show that Aaron agrees that there is some sort of distinction between truth makers and truth bearers. And then this whole discussion about statements and sentences being separate from propositions, the whole point of that was to show, okay, there's truth makers, and the fact that these things exist and they correlate with the statements. These are the, am I getting it right in saying that these things are the truth makers?
Correct.
And then the biggest conversation we need to start sort of having to sort of move forward through this argument now is to talk about, okay, so if the sentences, because I might just give a quote as well. So there's a quote by some Chinese guy. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not going to bother. But it's talking about meaning, but there's a similar sort of idea going on here. So he says, the fish trap exists because of the fish. Once you've gotten the fish, you can forget the trap. The rabbit snare exists because of the rabbit. Once you've gotten the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words exist because of meaning. Once you've gotten the meaning, you can forget the words. Where can I find a man who has forgotten words so I can talk with him? And this is, again, it's sort of making a distinction between the words, the sentences, the statements that are being uttered, and the thing that these are placeholders are for. So there is a separate thing. And people that sort of get bogged down on listening to words rather than what people are trying to communicate, on the meaning of the point of it.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, the meaning, and that's what I'm saying is more related to the proposition. That's the thing that's prior to any words, which is the pure meaning itself. Yeah.
Yes. So then this is the point. It's like, what is this thing then? Because if it's not in the sentences, if it's not on the paper, if it's not in the world, where is it? And if it's true, and it's necessarily true, and it's not a mental entity in the sense that you don't think it's in a human brain, because humans die and these things still, and this is the whole point of the argument, is that if all humans died, these statements would still be true. The law of non-contradiction would still be true.
So this is transcendental argument. That's why in the beginning I was like, well, there's 100 ways to put it.
Yeah.
Triangles existed. The truths about triangle, the properties of triangles existed before and after our existence.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not contingent on us. Very well said.
And so the whole point of this conversation now is that either you're going to lead yourself into the absurdity that Aron Ra does, or the discussion has to veer towards either Platonism or towards a necessary mind, i.e., a God.
Mm-hmm.
And
can I put it in a nutshell for you? Look, the properties of triangles were always true before or after us. These properties have to exist in the mind. So therefore, there was always mind. There was always mind.
Exactly.
Now, let me put it to you because people can't wrap their mind around these things, and I understand that they're not trained. Guys, it took me years to wrap my mind around these ideas. It took me years. I don't expect somebody hearing a podcast is going to wrap their mind around it. No, I don't think they will. So that's why I don't usually necessarily use these approaches. They're too. It's kind of like showing something really advanced in martial arts when you haven't taught them the basics. Okay. Now, one philosopher said it really beautifully. It's called Berkeley's Triangle. Berkeley's Triangle, if you can understand Berkeley's Triangle, it's a gate. I call it Copernicus all over again. Copernicus all over again. Because people in our world today, they're taught that mind is just something, it's a mist, it's a ghost, it's a mirage, it's an emergence, it's vapor. What's real is concrete. Okay, now Berkeley's Triangle flips that around on its head. I proposed this to Joe. Actually, I had a conversation with Joe, and I brought him up Berkeley's Triangle. I was trying to show him that it's not true, guys. Copernicus, he's the one who discovered. He's one of the men who discovered that it's not the Earth going around. It's not the sun going around the Earth. It's the Earth going around the sun. Everything is upside down. Flip it around. Berkeley's Triangle flips everything around. If I ask you, can you picture a triangle without any color? Just the objective facts of a triangle, the objective properties. Can you picture a triangle that's not black, white, green, yellow? Can you picture a triangle? We all agree color is subjective, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We all agree color is subjective. Okay, now you have a triangle, you see a triangle. Take away what's subjective, what's left? Nothing. Mental properties. Nothing exists, whether in the mind or in the world, that's not subjective. All we're seeing is subjective elements. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. The dunya sings the praises of Allah. Why? Allah is objective. The dunya is subjective. The dunya is 100% subjective. Everything we project onto the properties of triangles comes from the mind. The mind is not dunya. I'm going to explain this to you guys with a thought experiment in a few minutes. The mind is not dunya. You cannot put the mind in a test tube. Guys, we have to ask Aron Ra a simple question. Is science absolute? What does that mean? Does science tell us everything there is to know about everything? Or does science have a limitation and we need something else to tell us more about reality? I have a really good thought experiment for that. To prove to you, science is not absolute. Science is not absolute. We need more than science. Science cannot teach us everything about reality. Science is great. I love science, guys. I know I'm always talking about the weaknesses of science. Not because I'm a science denier. It's just because I'm trying to make another point. I'm trying to bring in metaphysics as well. Okay. I'm a lover of science, guys. I'm not a denier of science at all. I'm a hardcore lover of science. I listen to all their books. I watch all their documentaries. I listen to all their latest updates on what they think about the world, how the world operates. Quantum physics. I'm fascinated by it. I'm not a physicist, but I'm fascinated and I want to see what's their epistemology, and I cross-examine their beliefs all the time. I have students that are PhDs and I talk with them all the time for hours. Now I'm telling you guys, simple thought experiment. Imagine I was really, really tiny and I could walk around inside a human brain. I'm going to see brain matter. I'm going to see blood flow. I'm going to see neurons firing. I'm going to see your brain shift from one state to the other, but I will never see anything subjective. I'm a perfectly well-trained scientist. I see blood flow. I see chemicals in your brain shifting from one state to the other, but I never see your thoughts. I never, if you tell me, oh, I'm picturing a red apple in my mind, and I'm able to journey around your mind. I say, I never saw the red apple. I never saw anything subjective. All the things you taught me about pleasure, pain, happiness, etc. I saw no evidence whatsoever. All I saw was brain states, neurons firing, chemicals. We know, because of our personal experience, that happiness is true. We can picture a red apple. You could sing a song in your mind, but it's complete silence. Yet you say you hear the song, but when we put our recording devices, we don't hear anything. You say you're reciting Quran, we put our recording devices in your brain, we see only neurons firing. We heard no sounds. What I'm telling you is there's a limitation to science. Now you have a biased experience. The only reason scientists believe that I can picture a red apple in my mind is because they can do it also. It has nothing to do with the scientific method. You cannot put my thoughts, my experiences, qualia, in a test tube, so to speak. We cannot weigh it. We cannot measure it. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. Guys, I didn't make this up. It's known in biology. It's called the hard problem because they say we know nothing about it. We cannot even touch it with our instruments. It's far beyond our capability. Thomas Huxley, one of my favorite quotes, Darwin's bulldog, Aron Ra mentions him during the debate. Thomas Huxley says, for brain excitation to result in a mind is just as amazing as when Aladdin rubbed the lamp and a magic genie came out. Okay, I'm paraphrasing. That's a quote from Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. He's telling you, look, guys, mind, we have no account for it. Science, it's beyond our grasp. I'm telling you that they only believe in the mind because they have a prejudice, a direct experience with mind. It's not scientific. That they have a personal experience. Can I go tell my scientific friends, hey, I believe in something scientific and it's personal? They're like, wait a second, that's not scientific. That's not scientific. Put it in a test tube, then it's scientific. We're having a religious experience, like it or not, guys. Like it or not, I don't care if you're the most hardcore atheist. There's a difference between brain and mind. And here's the other thing. They think that brain causes mind. It's completely erroneous. It's completely erroneous. It's Copernicus. It's the mind that causes brain. The mind, there has never been a brain that existed outside of a mind. Think about that. Berkeley's triangle is telling you, look, everything about the triangle that you're looking at is in this thing called mind. The whole dunya is mind. Actually, your body is dunya. Guess what? Your body is also mind. In the mind of who? What? Allah. God. Imagine me and Aron Ra were sharing a dream, okay? Me and him are sharing we're in a dream. Grant me this premise. It's a thought experiment, okay? And I tell you, look, Aron, The dreamer is not under that rock. He's not above the sky. He's not here or there. The dreamer is the cause of this dream. Oh no, I want to see him in the test tube. I'm like, you don't understand. If there's a here's another way to look at it. Kids today, they play video games. We're in the video game. I'm telling you, there's a tower. There's a cause for this video game. No. Science is the pattern and regularities in the video game. It studied the video game. It knows where to get the coins. It knows where to get all the points. It scores big. It's pragmatic. Okay, but I'm talking about the algorithm in the tower, the cause of it all. Everything boils down to mind. We cannot escape it. That's why things like gravity, etc., are projections of the mind. We see patterns and regularity, then we invent a God that moved the world that way. When the Quran tells you, see that bird flapping its wings in the air? None holds it up but Allah. The Arabs knew that if I break a wing of a bird, he doesn't fly. How come Allah's not holding him up? They knew that a broken wing doesn't result in a bird that can't fly. What does it mean then? What does it mean? It means that Allah is responsible for every action you see in the universe. The Quran tells the Muslims, you didn't slay them, Allah slayed them. Every action you see in the dunya, we're hardcore determinists. They're hardcore determinists. You guys are familiar with determinism? Now, I believe in free will. We'll talk about compatibilism another day. I believe in free will. There's no way around it. We're going to talk about it shortly. But what I'm trying to tell you is, guys, mind is outside the grasp of science. It's a religious experience that they're having as well. If they admit to mind, they're admitting to a religious experience. And two, everything boils down to this religious experience. The triangle, guys, represents dunya. Dunya is an internal experience. And your physical body is also an internal experience. What is this one thing? If you removed all the contents of consciousness, what would you have? You would have a singularity. This is scratching the surface of Berkeley's triangle. It's not that the brain created the mind. This is a major fallacy. It presupposes physicality. If you put it in a syllogism, they're presupposing. If I ask a biologist, how do you know that the brain creates mind? How do you know that the mind emerges from brain? Okay, think about it. They say, think about the brain as a steam engine, and the mind is a steam. It's a type of mist that's created by the brain. Okay, think about that. Imagine you have a train. You're shucking in coal into the engine. The coal is burning. It's heating up water, and we're using vapor to move the axle, and it's creating a byproduct called steam. Yes, you guys understand? That's saying that material is fundamental. First, there's this thing called material. There's these concrete blocks. And from these blocks, magically, there's the mind that comes out. It's a magic. You need a magic wand, guys. Pinocchio, he had a nice fairy that came down, and she made him a real boy. He was a wooden boy. He was made of sticks and stones or whatever it was. He was made of elementary particles, whatever you want to say. And then, like Thomas Huxley says, it's magic. The mind arises. But now, the atheist point of view, the materialist atheist, has to account why my mind can move this body. If it is the case that my mind is a mist, a byproduct, how come I can decide to get up and walk out of my chair? The atheist worldview, if it was the case that in the beginning was just matter in the void, there was just these cold, dead elementary particles, cold in the sense that they're not living, and there was the void, and they sloshed around and they created this human being that is me. That means they went through a transition. Listen carefully here, because it's very important. They cannot account. Their worldview cannot account for what I'm about to say. It cannot account. If it's true that in the beginning there was matter in the void, and that's all there was no God. Matter moved itself by some magical force we're going to call gravity today. We're going to grant them the gravity. Okay, matter was being moved by some magical force that we never see. We can't put in a test tube. We're inferring it because things are moving. We have to infer it. At one point, you have to admit that matter starts to move itself. If Aron Ra says, no, matter doesn't move itself, then how are you formulating sentences? When I move my tongue and I give you a legible sentence, I'm giving you a rational argument. Is that a byproduct of blind forces that happened in the past? Is that just blind forces, non-thinking atoms bumping around into each other because my thoughts, my brain state, my brain, you could boil it down to elementary particles. These elementary particles, they tell us, are blind. They're not aiming for anything. They're just sloshing around, and everything is a giant cosmic sneeze. It's a fluke. It's a luck. It's a happenstance. How then can I have rational discussions with somebody? Are we just making noise? Is everything I'm saying in this mic right now just some random noise created from processes that happened billions and billions of years ago? Or are they intelligible, logical, rational sentences that are a byproduct of agency? There's an agent within my body now making all these decisions, talking, moving my arms, moving my limbs. I'm getting up. I'm getting myself a sandwich. Is that a cosmic error that I got up and I fed myself? What point, I want to ask atheists, at what point does matter is being moved by this magical force called gravity that even Hume doesn't grant? Even Hume, the Genghis Khan of atheists, the Genghis Khan, not Aron Ra. Okay, guys, Aron Ra, he's a nice guy, I'm sure, but he's a plaything. He's not a serious atheist. He doesn't even understand atheism. No offense, guys. Okay, maybe he's your friend. I don't mean to be mean, but he's not a black belt here. We're not dealing with the highest level, sharpest knife in the. We're not dealing with the greatest intellect. David Hume, I respect him. I don't agree with him, but I respect him. I'm asking all you atheists out there, respectfully, explain to me, when did matter was being moved by these magical forces, the weak force, the strong force, gravity, etc. And then it started to move itself. Matter started to move itself all of a sudden. Now you have to appeal to agency. What is agency? I cannot put agency in a test tube. What is this person? What are you talking about? Whoa, what? They're going to say, oh, it's an emergence. It came out of this configuration of atoms. Okay, wait a second. But this emergence, this thing you're talking about, me, I'm liable for my actions. If I go and I murder somebody, they put me in jail. I'm moving my own body right now. Actually, if you tell me that I'm not moving my own body, how on earth am I structuring logical sentences? How could we have a debate? Is the universe having a debate with itself? Are blind forces having a debate with itself? This is what we call reduction ad absurdum. We're reducing their worldview has now become absurd. Everything I'm saying in the mic, if their worldview is true, what I'm saying in the mic right now is blah, 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 blah. And you guys are like zombies, not having any experience in your minds right now whatsoever. The fact that you're having a direct experience, that's what the Quran says. They only know the appearance of things. They never consider their own selves. Look into the horizons and look into your own selves. You want to know Allah? You want to know the signs of Allah? You have to at one point look into your own selves. Science only looks at the dunya. They have a saying in science, shut up and calculate. Shut up and calculate. Feynman said, we don't understand quantum theory. You don't have to. Shut up and calculate. We found the formula that works. Your job is to make a mathematical model that is congruent with the world we see around us. Shut up and calculate. Philosophers, we ask, okay, how does this make any sense? What worldview makes sense? What worldview has the most explanatory power? It's an impossible, absurd worldview. When I ask atheists this, they just like throw up their arms and like, I don't know, I'm just an atheist. I just decide to be an atheist. Thomas Nagel, a well-renowned atheist who's teaches at the University of New York, okay, a very well-respected atheist, he even admits this. He says if Darwin is true, it's just instinct. Why would we have deep thoughts about truth? That makes no sense. He says, look, I'm an atheist. I'll always be an atheist. I don't know why. I'm going to be an atheist. He says he has an inclination to atheism, but I can't make sense of it either. He wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos. He asked the big questions. He's a philosopher. Science doesn't tell us anything about these questions. It only tells us about patterns and regularities found in nature. If their worldview is true, it leads to absurdities. And there are other absurdities that I can point to, but I want to let you guys jump in. Give me your thoughts on what I just said, please.
Yeah, Sharif, I didn't know if you wanted to come in and say anything, but
no, go for it. No, I agree with what Faraz is saying in terms of the fact that there is a fundamental problem in terms of the hard problem of consciousness and how they can then establish a few things. Obviously, one is in terms of agency, in terms of, matter becoming self-aware, having this qualia conscious experience, and also this intentionality, being able to think about things. But Jay, there's a question that somebody asked in the audience, and I want to just go to this particular question as well, because I think it ties in with what just Faraz also mentioned, and also to the argument. Yeah, but I think he misunderstands your argument as well, or the argument. So the question is directed to somebody else, Hartim. So he says, in short, the premises as Jake presented it goes. So he thinks this is what the premises are. He thinks truth requires mind. Because there's truth, therefore there's mind. Yeah. So mind exists necessarily, but it doesn't follow that a necessary mind exists. Yeah. So he's saying that if truth is true, if truth exists and truth requires a mind, then therefore there must be a mind. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily follow it's a necessary mind.
Yeah, that's not the argument. The argument is more like truth requires mind. Necessary truths exist, therefore a necessary mind must exist. Right. So he's leaving out the part.
He just negated without giving a reason. The comment I just read, you said you gave a logical argument which follows, and he just said, okay, well, it's not true. But why isn't it true? He didn't give us an argument on why it's not true. He expressed his position without telling us why. He says, but it doesn't follow that a necessary mind exists. Why doesn't it follow? Why doesn't it follow? That's the question.
Yeah. So I think he's probably his misunderstanding here is a few things, but one of the issues is that it's not just that truth exists; it's that necessary true propositions exist. And
yeah,
so
he's leaving that part out.
So I think there's this number 5 point, because we're on number 5.
Can I ask you guys a question? Do thoughts exist outside of minds?
No, they can't.
Okay. There always exists. Truth always existed. It's objective. It's standalone. It doesn't require us human beings, which are contingent. Correct?
Yeah.
So are they true in time and space? Are they floating around in time and space?
Yeah,
you said they're always true. You said they're always true. Therefore, there was always a mind.
Yeah.
Because truths are known by mind. They're objects of their content. They exist within mind. Here's the thing. We could show that mind is fundamental in other ways, like Berkeley's triangle. Mind is first, then matter. Guys, matter has never been put in a test tube. Never. Matter is an emergent property. Let me tell you where matter comes from. If you guys will allow me, I'll keep it short. I know I'm talking too much. I see a cup. I see this coaster. I see this microphone. I tell myself, what do they have in common? Everything has something in common with everything else. Oh, matter. They're all made of matter. Matter is a universal, what we call in philosophy a universal. It's an emergent property. It's not observed. Objective matter is never observed. It's an abstract belief. When we looked at Berkeley's triangle, where was the matter? The second you took out what is subjective, there was nothing left. There were only properties of the mind. Actually, the whole thing was mind. I'm telling you that if I give you a triangle, then I give you a square, then I give you a truck, then I give you a building, then I give you, I don't know, I show you a garden, you're going to be like, hey, look, all these things have something in common. That thing in common they have, I call it matter. Nobody ever saw matter. Anytime you ever see matter, guys, Heisenberg, all due respect, he said there is no such thing as matter. Matter is a mathematical equation. The root of all existence is information. Many philosophers came to this belief. Schrodinger said, no, it's like a celestial body. He says, no, matter is a thing. It's tangible. Now, let me ask you guys, there's so many ways we can look. At the end of the day, it all boils down to mind. Guys, if you guys listen to I don't know, let's say you guys see the color red. The light, they say light bounces off. Light bounces off that red painting. The cluster of light hits your eye. Your optic nerve gives a signal to your brain. Okay, I'm giving you in the nutshell. Then your brain interprets that signal, and you see that there's a phenomenon called red. That phenomenon is in a dark space. That's signal interpretation. My brain is interpreting signals. There's a mist going on inside my head that supposedly tells me about something outside in the real world. This is what we call the egocentric predicament. Guys, I know I'm throwing a lot at you here. It's very well understood in philosophy. It's called the egocentric predicament. We never have direct knowledge. We never have direct access to the outside world. All we have is our mind. That's it. There's nothing outside of that. It's a very difficult thing to understand. I'm trying to be as in a nutshell as I can, but they cannot say, hey, there's matter out there. Matter is a universal. Nobody ever put matter in a test tube. It's inferred. Gravity is inferred. Guys, this is basic David Hume, guys. Basic.
Sorry, just go.
Sorry. So I just wanted to sort of link, because what you were talking about there was the whole Kantian distinction between like the thing and the thing in itself, and Nietzsche sort of talks about it as well.
Yes,
he talks about the
course.
metaphors, and he's saying that like if you think about experience and how it goes down, you've got the thing, and you've got this sort of transformation of information that takes place on different levels.
Yes.
And the question is how can you be sure that the things you've got in your head relate to the experience at all? So you've got light bouncing off the object that hits the eyes. Light is transformed into neurons which run through the brain. The brain transforms the neurons again into something that is like an image. And like there's this constant transformation of information. And the big problem is how can you be so sure?
It's ultimately circular. It's ultimately circular.
The object of experience matches the actual thing in and of itself. And I also wanted to link, because there's a really good quote by a guy called Hussel. And this is good because it links a few different things. And also links to the argument. If you could just share my screen. I don't know. Here we go. It's a short quote. So it's part of a book. Husserl's really famous for sort of giving rise to philosophers like Nietzsche and things like that, and Heidegger. And not Nietzsche, sorry, just Heidegger and the existentialists. But he's talking here about a number of things. And one of the things it's linked to what you're talking about for us with regards to...
Sorry, who's this you said? I'm sorry, who's this?
It's someone called Edmund Husserl. So he was the teacher of Martin Heidegger. He was a German philosopher, but this book is called About the Ideas of Phenomenology. I'll just read the quote and then I'll show how it links to many of the different ideas we've sort of been playing with at the moment, and then also how it links to the argument. So he says the following. But what is the use of appealing to contradictions if logic itself is in question and becomes problematic? Indeed, the real meaning of logical lawfulness, which natural thought would not dream of questioning, now becomes questionable and even dubious. Biological lines of thought now crowd upon us. We are reminded of the modern theory of evolution, according to which man has developed through the struggle for existence in the process of natural selection, and with him, of course, also his intellect, and with the intellect, the forms that belong to it, especially the logical forms. Do not logical forms and logical laws, then, simply express the contingent peculiarities of the human species? But couldn't they have been different? And won't they become different in the course of future evolution? Knowledge, then, is just human knowledge bound to the forms of human intellect, incapable of making contact with the very nature of things, with the things in themselves, which links it to the issues you were talking about when, like, you're talking to atheists. If, like, what is it we're dealing with here? If these things, if they are just things that evolved with us, if the laws of logic, like, where do they exist? They're not in the world. You're not going out there and finding them. And this is
if
why
evolution is true, he's saying, if evolution is true, our rational thinking is contingent on evolution.
Yeah, so the point here is to show that if they're linking these ideas from their own view, as Hussel said, and he's not even necessarily making a theistic argument here. He's talking about the issues with the philosophy of science. But he's saying, like, if we are things that have evolved, and what are these laws of logic from an atheistic perspective, other than things that evolved with us? And then how does it not necessarily lead to some sort of absurdity? Because if our rational faculties are something that have developed,
it leads to an absurdity. It leads to an absurdity.
So now this is the whole point. If we bring it back to the argument that Jake has been using, so there are propositions, and for example, the laws of, we're saying here that the laws of non-contradiction, you can't deny these, because if you do, it leads to absurdity, because you require the laws in order to be able to negate them. In the same way you mentioned...
Yusuf, just sorry, really quickly, Yusuf, just on that first premise, Jake's making an even more modest claim. He's saying necessarily either the law of non-contradiction is true or the law of non-contradiction is not true. So he's actually saying even if somebody wants to deny the law of non-contradiction, that premise, number one, still holds to be true necessarily. But
Yeah, because it's a conditional, isn't it? Either this one or that one.
Either,
and even this one, it's funny because this also presupposes the law of excluded middle. It's saying like it's either this one or it's that one. It's not both of them.
Very true.
So you have to have these laws, and if you want to say no, well then what you're saying is that okay, if the law of non-contradiction isn't necessarily true, then it could be true still and not be. There's nothing stopping it. And in the same way, if you say truth does not exist, is that a true statement? Yes, it is. And so the whole point here is that these things, you can't just throw them out the window.
It's self-defeating. If you do, you're taking a self-defeating position. That's the correct way to, I think.
Exactly. And so this should force the inference now to the next one, which is premise 4, which is that therefore at least one true proposition exists necessarily. Because there is no way for them to wiggle out of those first two premises. And if all those three premises are true, then the conclusion follows necessarily, which is number 4. Therefore, at least one true proposition exists necessarily. And then we add to that proposition 5, which is propositions are mental entities. Now, you go into that in the debate and you explain why propositions are mental entities. And you give a number of things. So you say they have the property of intentionality, which is something Hussel was big on as well, this idea of directedness. And that they and you if you can go into that a bit, Jake. I don't know how long.
Jake, can you explain the difference between intention? Because some people, when we think of intentionality, they think of the intention to do something, but you're not talking about it from that perspective.
No. It's about directedness of things.
Yeah, that's right. So if you could just explain, what do you mean by intentionality in the philosophy of the mind, Jake?
Yeah, so I'll just explain it, and then I'll read this quote, which is from Alex Rosenberg, right? He talks about, imagine somebody thinking about Paris, right? So imagine you have the thought of Paris, and presumably that you guys can think of Paris, for us can think of Paris. Maybe he's been there, Sharif and Yusuf, right? And so he's trying to explain this problem. How is it that a clump of matter, like the brain or whatever neurons in the brain, how is it that it can intrinsically all by itself be about some other physical matter outside of the brain? And that's perplexing. How in the world could a piece of matter do that? Well, he says that it can't. And then his conclusion from that is that we don't actually think about anything at all, which is absurd in and of itself, because surely I'm thinking about the statements or sentences in his book. But he explains it like this. He says, and this is from Alex Rosenberg. He's an atheist and naturalist philosopher. He says, what we need, talking about the situation where you're thinking about Paris, what we need is a clump of matter. In this case, the Paris neurons, that by the very arrangement of its synapses points at, indicates, singles out, picks out, identifies. And here we just start piling up more and more synonyms for being about another clump of matter outside the brain. But there is no such physical stuff, he says. Physics has ruled out the existence of clumps of matter of the required sort. There are just fermions and bosons and combinations of them. None of that stuff is just all by itself about any other stuff. There is nothing in the whole universe, including, of course, all the neurons in your brain, that just by its nature or composition can do this job of being about some other clump of matter. And so he concludes from that, actually, in his book, that no, actually, humans, we think we're thinking about other things, but we can't, because how in the world could a clump of matter be intrinsically about or directed at some other clump of matter outside of the brain? He says it's impossible. Physics has ruled out this sort of stuff.
It's impossible.
So from a materialist paradigm, this is impossible. So this is actually a reductio ad absurdum against materialism.
The worldview is impossible. The worldview is impossible. It doesn't
Yeah,
have
if
any
you-
explanatory scope. He's 100% right. He's on the money here.
Yeah, and the point is this: if you think about anything at all, just from this idea of you having the ability to think about something else outside of your mind, this proves their own position. So here's the way you go: either then you believe, well, materialism is false, and which is our position, right? And you come towards the correct position, or you go to the absurdity, which is his position, is that in actuality you're not thinking about anything at all. But surely I'm thinking about these sentences that he just wrote down. So
Allahu Akbar.
it's a problem in that sense.
Jake,
Yeah.
can I give this as an example as well? Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe to emphasize this point. So what you're saying is propositions, which are these non-verbal, non-statement truth bearers, yeah?
Yeah, they have the same quality of intentionality.
They have the same quality of intention. They are about something, yeah?
Yeah.
Like, for example, when we have Morse code, dots and dashes, they're about something. But the
Yes.
dots and dashes won't tell us what it's about. It's the
Yeah.
mind that has to interpret the dots and dashes that tells us
Yeah.
what it's about. Yeah.
Right.
So therefore, when you talk about intentionality, you're talking about the ability for the mind to think about
Yes.
something.
And that's why I'm saying the propositions are mental entities, because what do they have in common with mind or thoughts? They both have this intrinsic property of intentionality. Propositions can be about things that exist in the outside world, just like our mind has that ability, right? And that's why I'm saying that propositions are best understood as mental entities, because they have the unique property that mindless matter does not have. A table or a chair or a phone or a bed or a cup is
Or
not
the dots and
intrinsically
dashes.
about, they're not
Yeah,
intrinsically about anything at all.
Can I give
They're
the
not.
audience? Can I give the audience a thought experiment? Because I think a lot of the audience might have trouble wrapping their minds about what was just said. Something that the atheist said something very profound. Okay, he was touching on what I was talking about earlier. I like to teach people through thought experiment, and this one I find people absolutely can wrap their mind around it. They have fun with it, and it can help them understand what is actually being said. I'm going to create a robot. This robot is called Jake 2.0. Instead of eyes, he's going to have a camera. Instead of bones, he's going to have steel limbs. Instead of skin, he's going to have sheet metal. Instead of blood, he's going to have oil. Instead of a heart, he's going to have a pump. Instead of a brain, he's going to have a computer. Jake 2.0 is identical to Jake. He's programmed exactly like Jake. He even has a red hat. He follows Jake around. He picks up Jake's habit. He laughs at what Jake says. He laughs at what Jake laughs at. He cries at what Jake cries at. He does everything Jake does. I cannot differentiate between the two, except I know one is made of steel and the other one is made of flesh and bone. Now, Jake can think, flesh and bone Jake, he can think about Paris. Jake 2.0 has no thoughts about Paris. All he has is ones and zeros. When he cries, when Jake 2.0 cries, he's not really feeling pain. He's giving the appearance of feeling pain. He's only the appearance of things. Like the Quran says, they only see the appearance of things. They don't consider their own selves. Within us all is a sign from Allah. Something outside the dunya, they cannot grasp, they cannot touch it. Even the atheist is mystified. Guys, he just had a religious experience. That text you just read, the man was having a religious experience. That's why we need religion to explain what's going on inside our heads. Science cannot touch this. Science has no grasp. Science is blind to this topic. Science is telling us everything is chemistry and physics. Jake, you're a robot. You're no different than this robot. However, if I chop that robot's head off, nobody says it's murder. Nobody cries. If I take my phone, guys, listen to this, okay? Hey Siri, how are you today?
I feel good. Thanks for asking.
Did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear it?
Yes.
He responded back to me.
Siri's
He
lying.
responded back to me. He's programmed. If this, then that. If somebody says, "Hey Siri, how are you?" Respond back with, "If this, then that." Respond back with, "I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" If he was super sophisticated, imagine Siri was super sophisticated that I couldn't differentiate between Siri and Jake. Is Siri still giving me the appearance of consciousness, or is it really conscious? It's only giving me the appearance of consciousness. It's never giving me true consciousness. It's never truly thinking about Paris. It's only giving lip service. And I'm going to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt in a moment. I'm going to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, if I sat here and I took Jake, flesh and bone Jake, and I tried to convince him that there are squared circles out in the world, he wouldn't believe me. I could talk to him till I'm blue in the face. Guys, I've tried to convince my wife that I can both be married and single. She says no. How? Where? I'm trying to program her. She has a fitra. The robot, however, I can program the robot. If this, then that. If somebody tells you there are squared circles out there in the world, affirm it. I can program a robot to do that. Robots don't have fitra. They don't have consciousness and they don't have fitra. They need to be programmed, and they can be programmed for anything. I could tell a robot, when you stub your toe, laugh and smile. I can program him to have anything. He has no qualia. He's not having an internal experience about Paris, happiness, joy, sadness, misery. And not only that, he has no fitra. You cannot convince me that there are squared circles. You cannot convince me that the law of non-contradiction is false. Why? I have an innate born fitra. That's why the Quran says it, Einstein said it, atheists say it. We have an intuition, and reason serves intuition. I'm quoting you, Einstein here. Even he admits to this. This intuition, they don't think about it. They say, look, there's a saying in science, shut up and calculate. Your job is not to philosophize. You're not a philosopher. Figure out the patterns and regularities out there in nature. I'm telling you guys, look, you can never build a robot and make it human. Never. It's missing something. Now, in the Quran, it tells us, God created Adam from the soil. Call it elementary particles. Call it what you want. Something physical. Something out there in the world. Something seen. And he breathed into him his ruh. We have something within us that's not of the dunya. That's unseen. I prefer to say unseen. I don't like to say matter and immaterial. I don't like to say that. I prefer to say seen and unseen. Because even for me, the seen is never, the Quran never tells us, hey, there's a thing out there called matter. No. It never tells us that. There's the seen and the unseen. That robot never has qualia, internal experience, and also does not have a fitra. The fitra is given to us by God. Then we reason. God is an innate belief. I can't shake it. And I have more ways to point it to you. But tell me, what is the difference? If you're a materialist philosopher, you have to accept that the robot and Jake are equal in value and they're having the same experiences, which they clearly are not. That's why that atheist you just quoted recently said, how could clumps of matter, zeros and ones, so to speak, have an experience of Paris? How's that possible? There's an ontological jump. Their worldview doesn't have the scope to account for these things. If in the beginning there was only matter in the void, this all doesn't make sense. Agency doesn't make sense. Qualia doesn't make sense. Reason doesn't make sense. If in the beginning there was God, okay, all of it makes sense. That's what you would expect to see in the world. You'd expect to see souls, minds that can move bodies, rational thinking. You'd expect to see an innate beliefs. If in the beginning there was God, what kind of world would that be? There would be morality. God is good. Well, guess what? We're awake in the world, and guess what? We see morality. All the things that should be are. If I lived in a world where it was just noise, dead matter bumping into one another, I would tell you, okay, there's no God. But that's not the world I live in. I'm having an experience of qualia. I have an experience of agency. You're telling me my mind is emergent. My mind tells my body what to do. You're basically telling me I'm a zombie. That's what they have to do. They have to deny themselves. Where have you heard that before? Where have you heard that statement before?
So in the Quran,
Allahu Akbar, it's in the Quran.
If you look at the statements of people like Sam Harris, they go as far as like denying the self completely, and it leads to what is referred to as like mereological nihilism, where it's like, if at the base of reality everything is, like you say, just dead matter, snooker balls hitting snooker balls, then fundamentally there is no distinction between things, because everything is at base just energy, just matter, just things.
I once painted his followers in the corner. They told me Sam Harris wrote a book on determinism. I said, if determinism is true and absolute, like he claims, who wrote the book?
There's no Sam Harris, because he even says himself, there's no self.
Is my car driving itself? My car is it's a determined system.
Objects.
Somebody has to drive it. You're saying there's no driver.
So yeah,
they cannot account for agency.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of the big problems. And now what we're saying here, to start bringing it back to this argument again, is that you've got these propositions. Propositions exist, and they are mental entities. There is something about propositions that in them they have this thing, what we're referring to as intentionality, which is this aboutness, this directedness that you only find with consciousness. You only find it with this when you have something engaging with the world. I look at a cup, I see the cup, I'm looking at the screen, I see you brothers, I'm seeing the chat and everyone in there. There's a directedness. Consciousness points itself towards things, it extends outside of itself. And if propositions are mental entities necessarily, and if there are true propositions that are necessary, they can't be grounded in us, because we're contingent. We can be, we cannot be. And so the whole force of this argument is that it's taking you with every inference to this idea, okay, so you have these necessary truths, true propositions. Propositions themselves are mental entities. They have this intentionality, and whenever you have this intentionality, there's a necessary connection to some form of life, to consciousness. There are necessary propositions. They can't be grounded in us, because we didn't exist at one point. Yeah, we originate, we perish, and there's no disagreement between theists and atheists here that there was a point in time when humans, or conscious things, in terms of created things that begin, didn't exist. And so if there are necessary truths, yeah, if there are things or propositions that cannot cease, it cannot fail to be true, as it says in Proposition 2, the premise 1 is a necessary truth. It is true and could not have failed to be true. And if a proposition is itself necessarily a mental entity, then you can't ground this in anything other than a necessary intellect, a necessary mind, a necessary life. And we say, and this is what we describe Allah as, we say that Allah is the eternal, that He always has existed, He always will exist, and that on the day of judgment everything will perish save His face. He will be the only thing that exists. And so we say He is the thing that is necessary, because that's what it means. To be a necessary existence is to be to such a degree that you cannot fail to exist. And if there are necessary truths, they have to be connected to Him, to that necessary life.
If something is contingent, okay, principle of sufficient reason tells us that it had to, all contingent things came into existence. They didn't always exist. That's one characteristic of a contingent thing. It has an explanation, and it came to be. And necessary truth, did it come to be, or was it always in existence? Which of the two is it?
Well,
if it came to be, it's contingent. If it's necessary, think about it. One of the look, this coaster is contingent. One of the reasons why it's contingent, a characteristic of a contingent thing, is that it came to be. It wasn't always. Yes or no? That's how Leibniz describes principles of sufficient reason. If it came to be, it's contingent. It can't be necessary if it has a birthday.
I don't mean to interrupt first.
No, please go ahead.
Seeing the time, Jake. So I know you've got to go soon. What time do you have to leave? How long have you got, or do you have to go now?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to head off now. Actually,
should we just give just 10 minutes just to finish the argument off, just really quickly, and then maybe we can have a part 2 if Faraz is free, inshallah, to go into some of the rebuttals. But so there's a question, comment. It's a discussion that's been taking place. Yeah, truth that is not dependent on mind. They usually laity, referring to our minds, meaning things would still be true even if we didn't exist. So the point I'm raising here, so maybe just Jake, so that when people say that there are truths, so that law of non-contradiction, or even the first premise, which is a modified view of the law of non-contradiction. So even if the law of non-contradiction is true, it's a proposition, it's a mental entity, yeah, and it cannot fail to exist, as Faraz has made the point as well, being necessary truth, then what we're saying is that it's going to be true whether we exist or don't exist, but it's got to be true because it would have to have some sort of intellect to make it sort of carry that truth, yeah?
Yeah, because the question is, where would it exist? He's saying that truth can exist apart from minds. Okay, the truth can exist apart from mind. Where does the truth exist? Does the truth exist in, my back pocket? I mean, where is it? You're saying, I don't understand what this guy is saying, because I've been reading his comments in the chat. He's saying, well, truth exists independently of any mind, meaning independently of humans, independently of God. Okay, well, let's take that for granted. Where is it? Where is this truth? Can we take the truth and can we put it in a test tube and look at it? Where is it?
It necessitates Platonism.
Where the hell is this truth? I'm sorry to say.
What he's trying to say, the materialist worldview is, look, there was matter, and then there's everything else came after it. This matter was always there before you knew about it, before your mind. I'm telling you, it's the opposite. Mind came first. Mind is first. And then this matter is dependent on mind. That's why I call it Copernicus all over again. He didn't understand Berkeley's triangle. I don't blame him. It's something you have to think about, meditate about. We never see matter. Matter is a projection of the mind. It doesn't exist out there in the world. It exists in here in the mind. We are also in the mind. That's what people don't understand. There's not a cloud called consciousness behind your eyeballs, between your ears. There's not some cloud, that's some magical cloud, some magic genie in there. It's not in there. That's why I prefer to say seen and unseen. The part of me you could see and the part of me you can't see, because it's a false dichotomy to say matter and mind. Those are two things that derail us going any deeper, because they still see things as concrete. It's all sensation. I like to give a thought experiment, but I won't get into it now. But to clear that up, I know we're running short on time, but there is a way to think about it to make sense of it all. And I believe it's also, I mean, it's true. You experience it, and also it's written in the Quran. I mean, it's in the Quran.
So just as a final point in terms of this question is, after realizing that dunya is basically in our minds, how do we escape Harun Yahya's fallacy that dunya is only an illusion and not real? So the point here is this, is that we're not saying in terms of that all we are just mental entities and everything existing outside of our minds are just mental entities. This argument is specifically saying, yeah, you can have physical things, yeah, but the argument here that Jake has laid out is saying that there are truths which, and these truths are contained in propositions, so they're true propositions, and there are necessary true propositions, things which are true whether I exist or any other. Even if no human being exists, it will still be true. That proposition is not a statement; it's not words, but that proposition is the meaning that has some sort of intentionality, mental content.
It corresponds with something.
Yeah. So it has this idea. Yeah. So go on, Jake. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just want to give an argument for people to understand maybe a bit better what I'm saying here. Let's imagine, for the sake of the argument, per impossibility, because Muslims, we don't believe this is impossible, but let's say nothing at all existed whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be true that nothing existed? Well, if you say it would be true that nothing existed, then something would exist, namely the truth that nothing existed. So you wind up in a contradiction, right? In other words, truth implies existence. So if nothing existed and it's true that nothing existed, then that implies that something exists. You see the problem? So that's why this is what I'm trying to explain to people. Why, or you can even run the argument a different way. So I can take premise one, for example, right? I can change it and say, let's say that God does not exist, right? Let's per impossible. Let's say God does not exist. Well, it's true. It would be true, according to them, the atheists, that God does not exist. But atheism, and this is another way to frame the argument, atheism actually entails a contradiction. Why? Because if atheism is true, meaning the proposition that God does not exist is true, and that's necessarily true, well, then that's going to entail a necessary mind existing. And so atheism being true, and the atheist claiming that atheism is a necessary truth, that God necessarily does not exist, is actually going to entail the existence of a necessary mind, and therefore atheism is contradictory. So both the idea that God does not exist and that nothing at all exists and that that's possible, both of them entail contradictions, right? So this is just another way of me trying to explain it, to try to get at what I'm saying here. But the idea that truth can exist apart from any mind whatsoever, well, the question is, where is it? My claim is that truth is mental entities, and that thoughts, something that Frost brought up earlier, they can't exist apart from an intellect. How is it you can have a free-floating thought? Where does it exist? Oh, maybe it's in, going loops around Saturn, or what? I mean, what is a thought apart from a mind? And that's actually what the atheists and what's his name, Alex Malpass. See, some clever atheist, because we're dealing, let's be honest, like we said, we're dealing with Aron Ra. I mean, you're a martial artist. I don't even know if I would give him a belt, because I don't even know if he's welcome in the gym at this point. No disrespect to the guy, but I'm just saying. Okay, but Alex Malpass, okay, he's a black belt. He's a black belt in terms of atheists, philosophers, representatives. He sees the force in this argument. Now, there's three main positions where you can go. One, you can say truth exists, and because there's necessary truths, there must be a necessary mind, there must be God. Okay, that's our position. Then there's another position, which is basically the route that Aron Ra is going down, which is truth doesn't really exist. It's just a figment of our speech. We just make it up, right? That's another position. That winds up in absurdities for all the reasons that we already talked about, right? And then you have another position, which is the third position, Alex Malpass's position, which is an atheistic form of Platonism, which is, Plato had this idea of the forms. There's this idea of, there's a form of the perfect horse, and there's a form of the perfect, and not in his day and age, but in our day and age, the perfect car, or the perfect dog, the perfect human, whatever. There's a perfect form. And there's this realm of the forms in this abstract reality that's not physical reality, that exists apart from any mind and apart from the physical world. There's this other realm of the forms. Now, what the atheists are saying, well, truth is sort of in this realm. It's in this Platonic realm, right? It's in the Platonic realm of the forms, maybe something like that. But the problem with Platonism is, the famous problem with this form of Platonism is it's really unintelligible, right? Because it's like having a thought without a thinker. Where is this thought? What is this concept? Where it's like having a concept without a being to conceptualize it. It's utter nonsense, right?
Exactly.
So
Platonism. Go on. No, go on.
No. So I'm just saying, these are the three. I'm just trying to lay out, because I'm saying, okay, guys, I'm giving an argument for God, but I'm giving you the three broad options. Okay, I'm being honest. I'm saying, okay, if you say, Jake, okay, if we don't take your option, what's the other option? Well, you could go Aron Ra's route, and you could go La La Land and say, well, truth is just really doesn't exist. We just make it up as we go along. Most people don't want to take that option, because they're sitting here saying, well, that doesn't really make much sense to anybody. And then you can take our option, of course, which God exists, and he is al-haq, as Frost said. Or take the position of, well, truth is in this some weird realm. It's not the physical realm, and it's this abstract realm, but there's no mind to conceptualize it, right? And so the problem with that is, it's like a thought. It's like a free-floating thought without a thinker.
It's brilliant as well, because even this comment now, unbeknowingly, has led itself to Platonism, because it's referring to truths as objects, as things that exist. And this is Platonism, because Platonism is seeing the forms as, and because the famous analogy he gives is the cave, and he's talking about you've got the reality is the realm of the forms. That's the true. That's the real. And then our world, where you see particulars of these things, are like shadows of the real things. And so he gives the analogy of, like, there's a fire and there's slaves connected to chains, and they're looking at a wall, and all they see are the shadows of the real things. And you've got people walking past the fire, and the real things, the actual objects, are projecting shadows onto the wall. But the prisoners are not aware of reality. They think that the shadows are real. But the whole point is that there's this inference to another realm that's not here. There's not these three dimensions, that place is more real, and that the things that the scientists are engaged with is dealing with shadows, is dealing with something that's not real. So the whole point of this is that either you're going to go down Aron's route of just pure absurdity, or you're going to lead yourself to Platonism. You're going to have to posit that truths are like objects that exist in a more real way than these things. These things are not really true. So the idea of a cup, yeah, you've got the form of the cup exists, and these things are shadows. The better example is like, what is a table? Because Plato, when he's doing it, when he's going through the argument, he's like, what is a table? Define a table. And then no matter what definition someone gives, it's like, oh no, but you can't say it's something with 4 legs, because chairs also have 4 legs. Or there's a table that doesn't have any legs, or there's a table with 3 legs or 10. What is it that makes a table a table? And he ends up saying,
what is the essence? What is the essence?
Yeah, what is the essence? And he's saying, you always recognize a thing when you see it, despite the fact that you can't really break it down into terms. And so he's saying that there has to be something. And so, but the thing is even he necessitated that there was some type of God. So Platonism as well insists on some type of God. It'd be interesting to see how Alex Malpass would sort of talk about negating.
Can we put up that other comment that just by the free naturalist thinker or whatever it was? You guys have it? I think
to be honest, I don't even think he understands what he himself.
No, but I'd love to ask him a question if we could put up his comment.
Jake,
okay.
Just to sort of check as well.
Yeah.
Do you need to leave now? I don't want to keep you on
I'm going to have
longer.
to go. I think we concluded the argument, but we'll let Faraz respond to this, and then we'll close it after that. How about that?
Okay, inshallah.
Truth exists in reality. Okay, no problem there. Truths are objective. No problem there. Objects are non-mental things. Okay, can you prove that one? That's a presupposition. Show me something that is non-mental. He can't. Suppose that somebody tells you, hey, look, see this physical brain? Yeah. When I poke around in it, the guy's behavior changes. Therefore, by poking on his brain, I change his behavior. His behavior, his mind is controlled by his brain. I'll open up.
Isn't it funny he calls himself free naturalist, by the way, too? Because what you're saying, and with the materialist deterministic idea, I mean, how's he calling himself free naturalist? What is he free? In what sense? Like you're saying, because his idea is we can just poke the brain and change whatever he believes. So I mean, right. But anyway, go ahead. I just thought it was ironic that that's his name.
Yeah, it's just funny the way he sees truth.
You should say determinist naturalist. Anyway, look, when you point to the brain, I'm telling you the brain is like Berkeley's triangle. It's pink. It's got squiggly lines. It has a shape. Take away everything subjective. I want to see the objective brain. I don't want any, because pink, that's from my mind. That's the way I interpret the world. When you take away what's subjective, there's nothing left. There's only properties that are mental in my head. It's Berkeley's triangle all over again. It's not objects are non-mental things. It's not. That's incorrect. You're presupposing your conclusion. This is a fallacy in philosophy. If I say, look at, let's say I want to prove brains are physical. I say, okay, look, take this physical brain and tinker around with it. It changes the person's behavior. You assumed in premise 1 that it's physical. I'm asking you to prove that it's physical. Take a brain and then prove to me it's physical. All you see is color, shapes, properties, like Berkeley's triangle. The whole dunya is Berkeley's triangle. And by the way, the Quran does say the dunya is a delusion. It does say that in the Quran, okay? I'm telling you is everything is dependent on our mind, not the other way around. Our mind is not dependent. What if I take a pill? Okay, let's say I take a pill and I fall asleep. The pill is physical. You're presupposing it's physical. We have to prove the pill is physical. When I look at the pill, it always has a subjective color. When I take away the subjective color, all there are mental properties. That's what idealism is, guys. That idealism is considered irrefutable. Many great thinkers have tried to refute idealism. At the end of the day, it all boils down to mind. Suppose me and you are sharing a dream. Okay, so just suppose it for a second. And every day you come and you watch me play baseball. I'm playing baseball. You throw the pitch, I hit the ball, boop. You hear the crack of the bat. You see that event happen so many times, you start deducing laws of physics. Remember, we're in a dream state now. And I tell you, look, guys, this bat, it's not really physical. Yeah, it makes a sound. Yeah, it has a mass. That's all sensation. It's all feelings happening in a place we call the mind. What do you mean, this mind? Look at these patterns and regularities. I call it the laws of physics. Yes, you think there's gravity, but it's just really a pattern. You're projecting this idea of gravity. You think these patterns or regularities are done by these forces that live in this dream. They don't. It's really all the dreamer. The dreamer controls everything. There's only one force. There's only one power. Everything else is just patterns and regularities. Everything else is just mind. Yeah, you think, look, guys, did you ever have a dream where you ate something and it was delicious? Of course, you had a sensory experience in your dream. There wasn't anything concrete. Experience doesn't necessitate something to be concrete. If I take a pill and I fall asleep, so what? The pill is still subjective. It is still color and mental properties. I could be in a dream state, take a pill, and dream that I'm falling asleep in my dream. The whole point of it is we never put matter or any concrete object in a test tube. We always refer to sensory experience. At the end of the day, it all comes down to sensory experience. And here's another great argument for you, Jake. Sensory experience requires a mind. Sensory experience requires a mind. There is no sensory experience outside of a mind. It's fundamental. Everything is sensory experience. Even your senses are contained in mind. Everything is nested in mind, period. Once you understand this, then you'll understand. Then you'll understand. Everywhere I look, I see the face of Allah. When all has perished, there will remain the face of Allah. Because necessary things, Jake, which you didn't add in your argument, which you should, are eternal. They can't come to be. If they came to be, they're contingent. Truths, necessary truths, are eternal.
To be fair, though, in the discussion, he questioned Aron Ra on the definition of necessary. And I think in your actual, in your presentation, not in the premises that you laid out there, but I think you defined necessary. And you then went and discussed it with Aron.
Yeah, that's why I asked him when he said, okay, God does not exist. Is that true?
Yeah.
And I said, was it always true?
Yeah.
because
yes.
he said, well, I mean, truth is only exists if a sentence exists. Well, no sentence is eternal. So it wasn't always, so it wasn't always true that God didn't exist. And he didn't even want to verbalize it because of how silly it would sound. How is an atheist going to come up to a theist, to a Muslim or Christian or whatever, and say, you know what, God does not exist? And that's true, but it wasn't always true. Well, what does that even mean? What are you saying, that God existed and then, astaghfirullah, he died or something? I mean, it just sounds so ridiculous.
This is why I say he's reactionary. Like, he's not really thinking through these positions and seeing where it takes him.
It's the same thing with this guy, because I asked him the question, right? He's going on here, and in the chat, I asked him, where does truth exist, right? I said, where is it? I said, is a rock true? And then now he turns around and listen what he says. He says, truth is everywhere. A mind doesn't need to exist in order for it to exist. Truth is everywhere. So
everywhere.
Now you're pantheist. You're saying truth is everywhere, right? I mean,
guys, let me ask you a question. Where is the Earth? Okay, the Earth is in the solar system. Where's the solar system? In the Milky Way. Milky Way is where? In the universe. Where is the universe? It's a concept. Locality is a concept. Again, we have mind. The Greeks asked, if I go to the edge of the universe and I chuck a spear, if it hits something, how is space limited? What's on the other side? And if it continues going, if it keeps traveling, how could it be limitless? Space is relative. Space is relative. It's a concept. It's not concrete. Again, we never find anything concrete, guys. We always find concepts. We always find more essence, more metaphors, more this. There's only one concrete, objective reality in the world. There has to be. And that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why only Allah is one. That's why when Allah says Allah is one, he's telling you, look, I am objective. For something to be objective, it has to be singular. The second there's two, there's an essence. There's something in common. Allah has nothing in common with the dunya. Nobody has anything in common with God. God is unique and alone, one standing. Nothing is like him. That's why the Quran defines truth so perfectly. And the Quran is a revealed religion, yes, but it's also a natural religion. When you read the Quran, it's the reminder of your natural religion. You can discover Islam within yourself the religion of the Fitra. That's what the Quran says. The Quran tells Muslims, tell the people of the book, Abraham was upon the true path. He was on the righteous path before the scripture. Because the scripture, the Torah, is talking about Abraham. Okay, so Abraham necessarily comes before the Torah. He was a righteous man. What religion was he on? The Fitra. We discover our religion. Our religion is, yes, alhamdulillah, it's revealed, but it's also an innate and natural religion. That's why the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, always taught us, every child is born a Muslim. From the beginning of time, Adam was a Muslim ﷺ. It's an innate, natural religion. Everything we're philosophizing, didn't you guys realize we're slowly discovering Islam? We're reverse engineering Islam. Ibn Tufayl writes a great book about this. We're realizing the truth is singular, it's eternal, it's literal, it always was. Nothing else can be like that. There can only be one objective, purely objective truth. There can't be a second, because then they'll have something in common. We're reverse engineering Islam. That's why Islam is logical, and I find it to be self-evident.
Yeah. So,
alhamdulillah, I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'm just going to say, for anyone who wants to look into these sort of things in more detail, I just want to sort of plug in Sapias Institute. So we have a learning platform. We've got a lot of courses on there that are completely free. Like, for example, the Advanced Dawah Training course for those of you who want to engage in Dawah. We've got the Divine Reality. Brother Jake's got a number of courses on Christianity as well. So for those of you who have been watching this incredibly popular live stream that occurred between Brother Jake, Daniel, and a couple of flunkers.
Guys, I just want to say one thing before we close, because I know a lot of people are going to be really upset with me. Okay, because Akida is going to come in. Guys, there were great Muslim thinkers. We don't all agree. Okay, me, I say Allahu Ala. When we come to disagreements, I say, look, follow what's clear and concise in the Quran, what's neat and clear. What's ambiguous, leave it. We don't have to perfectly agree 100%. We're not going to be, listen, on the day of judgment, you're not going to be, not every hair is going to be split on what you believed. Okay, I'm doing the best of my ability with my logic, what I understood, and I'm telling you, classic Islamic thinkers proposed occasionalism. I won't name names because then people are going to have a prejudice. One very well-respected thinker said, look, the world, occasionalism is the view that there is no cause and effect. Allah is creating one image after another in sequence, like in a dream. When you're in a dream, when you hit that ball with a baseball bat, there's no baseball bat hitting a ball. It's just one image after another. And was an Islamic view, a very popular Islamic view, that Allah's constantly creating every single action, every single image you see, constantly, nonstop. And it's like, there's no actual forces out there. It's one image after another, seamlessly, perfectly. God is constantly creating the universe. This eliminates a lot of paradoxes. It solves a lot of logical problems. It seems to be very sound. It solves the problem of free will and determinism. We could talk about it another day. But I just want to say, like, I'm not coming up with these things. A lot of people think I'm making these things up in my own mind. Like, I figured it all out. Like, I'm saying that all the Muslims of old, they got it wrong. No. All the Muslims of old, they didn't get it wrong. I'm not saying they got it wrong. I'm telling you, I'm agreeing. My point of view has a lot to do with what I read in Muslim philosophies. Muslims forgot about it. Muslims made philosophy haram for some reason. Okay, what philosophy is just another word for logic. Don't confuse philosophy with blind following of Aristotle, please. That's a major misconception. When you say philosophy, they think, oh, you blind follow Aristotle. Not the case. When Ghazali used the word philosophy, he wasn't meaning logic. He was talking about blind followers of Aristotle, not logic. Muslims are supposed to be logical. If you're going to make logic haram, make mathematics haram. Make all types of logic haram. Logic is not haram. Logic is very important and fundamental. Not every Muslim has to be a philosopher, but we need philosophers in Islam. Definitely. We need historians. We need physicists. We need engineers. We need philosophers as well. So before anybody starts to jump to any conclusion that I'm disagreeing with the classical thinkers, I'm not. And I can bring my proofs if you guys like one day. We could sit down and talk. But occasionalism is a valid and well-respected view in classical Muslim thinking.
Jazakallah khair, brother, for us. Obviously, there are a variety of views in terms of the Islamic belief, in terms of occasionalism or accepting secondary causation, things like that.
Of course.
But and that's fine, alhamdulillah. And I think you made the point, which is a correct point, which is on these branch issues on these aspects of speculative theological matters, then it's not the basis of salvation for Muslims anyway. So it's not something that we should divide over and things like this. But I really appreciate you coming on, for us. Your insight, your understanding, and the way you're able to explain things has been really enlightening for all of us, alhamdulillah. And also, Jake, it's a sad situation. We've not been able to get through all of the debate that Jake had, but I think the main bulk of the argument that Jake presented, and maybe it's for some people, they have to sit, maybe watch other videos. Certainly watch Yusuf Ponders, his video. He's doing a whole series on that debate, and he's gone through the beginning of it. He's on the 55-minute, an hour mark.
Yeah, I'm not
of it,
far
only
in
2
and-
hours. So
and
it's
I've done like 6
really
hours
good.
of streaming.
It really explains it, and he goes through he plays the video and then gives notes and explanations. So if people want to understand it more, please check Yusuf out. For us, is there anything that you any plans, anything big that's happening that you can spill the beans on? Give us an exclusive.
No, not really. I'm right now. I'm really immersed in my professional career. Inshallah, in the future, when I retire, I plan to write books and expand on my philosophies. I'm still developing them. I graduated many years ago in philosophy. I've never stopped studying and researching and learning. Alhamdulillah, it's a passion of mine. So as much as I train martial arts, I also study a lot. I'm very passionate about these topics, and I go as deep and far as I can. And in the future, inshallah, once I have time and I'm retired, I plan to, inshallah, write books. People are always asking me to write a book, and that's why I'm saying in the future, inshallah, I will. But you guys are doing great. You guys have great content. I like to follow you guys, listen to your content. You guys are doing fantastic. I like to get together with you guys every so often. And I really enjoy
for us,
talk.
would you be willing to do a review of your discussion with Joe Rogan? That would be a good.
Of course.
Put him on the spot there.
No, I'm happy
Yeah.
to. I'm happy to. Honestly, I haven't listened to that conversation ever. I've only I was part of that conversation. I never listened to it again. But I'm happy definitely to go over it. No problem.
Yeah,
that'll be a good show, inshallah. I think that'll be really good. But Jazakallah khair. And Jazakallah khair for the audience for listening. Please share, like, subscribe, all those good things. Check out the channels for all the brothers here as well. And inshallah, we will hopefully see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum.